What's poppin', gamers? It's Beach Gen Game Club, episode 2. If you've seen any of our previous episodes, welcome back. And if it's your first time here, there should be in the description a playlist of our previous episodes if you wanted to like catch up and see, what all of this is about. Now, I gotta say, this is a very special episode for many reasons, but namely, we finally played a game with a fucking beach in it. If you read the title, you already know, but it's ICO for the PS2. Alan, I think you kind of had something you wanted to... Wow, I should have read what you were going to say.
You had like a larger plan for it, for the structure of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we started with the Dreamcast because, it's like the first Beach Gen console. And moving forward, we decided we want to hit all the major consoles. We'll get one game for each before we start doing multiples. So we moved on to the PS2 this week with ICO, and that leaves the GameCube and Xbox. And so after this, we're going to be hitting one of those consoles. We're going to be voting on games between them.
Yeah, we have a couple ideas we're throwing a couple games around. We're trying not to be just stereotypical weeb gamers, there's already some dissenting voices like rising up from the back, in that respect. Don't worry, we'll fix it. Next time it's gonna be fucking Geist or something on the GameCube.
Vex.
Yeah, I think especially what we want to do is try not to just rely on like these little known indie gems you've never heard of, like Shenmue and ICO. Hopefully we actually like crate dig a little bit in the future.
Dude, this crazy game called Ninja Gaiden Black.
Yeah, exactly. So you've never heard of it before. But yeah, no, we got some good ideas, and at the very least, it's stuff that probably everyone in the call has not played before, so that the idea behind this can actually kind of work.
Yeah, for today, for our first ICO session, we got I think 5 people who've already played it in the past. But we haven't played through it again. I think most of us have not played through it again recently, so our memories are still kind of hazy right now, and that's kind of the fact that we want. And we have 2 people who have not played at all. John, are you excited to dig into ICO?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm really excited. I have been just frothing at the mouth to play this formative game for so many developers.
Just like your favorite game, Ikaruga.
So
yeah, very much so.
Hot Pocket, you're I know you appreciate stuff like Rain World, where the experience is kind of conveyed through deep systems, and where obviously the game has like big kind of human themes, but then it's conveyed with, I'm repeating myself, but with deep systems, and ICO is very much not like that. Do you kind of have feelings on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm predicting like a 7.5 probably. Where, I mean, this is just from going off of what I've heard of it. I think it's gonna be, I think it's gonna be very visually and thematically resonant, but I'm skeptical that the mechanics are actually gonna meaningfully convey those things. But we'll see.
Yeah, I kind of brought this up in the pre-show. One critic that I think a lot of us are big fans of is Celia Wagger. She writes a lot about, with a depth perspective in mind about games. She has a big blog that we're probably going to link as well. And she once said that the difference between ICO and Shadow of the Colossus obviously the next game from the same studio, is the difference between a bad game and a good game. Because, sort of like a game like Rain World, Shadow is somewhat driven by systems. You can say the experience is elevated by systems, whereas ICO is a much more rigid kind of game, right? It is. It's often been said that it's an evolution of cinematic platformers from the 2D era, like Prince of Persia. We're gonna go into that more as we discuss the game's history. In general, the next session that we sit down, the next time we sit down, it will be after we've completed the game, and then discuss both our first time thoughts and our thoughts upon revisiting the game. Did anybody have any notes? Or?
I wanted to say the systems driven nature of Shadow definitely puts like an interesting spotlight on this game. But both games very, and then later The Last Guardian, very much feel like they're directed by an animator, which they are. And I think that kind of pulls us towards Ueda's background, which I think could be pretty interesting to discuss.
Yeah, I never knew that Ueda started as an animator until like this chat actually, but like that totally checks out given like not only the presentation of his games and how like fluid like they are in motion, but just like the energy and like the progression of the games, they all like give off that impression, I guess, instinctually, because it's very much a game about the presentation first and foremost. Like one of the, everyone jokes about it, but like the inverse kinematics in ICO is like one of the things everyone always points at, and it's just like one of those like small animation details that like adds to the whole thing.
Oh, sorry, I was sorting through some stuff. Yeah, it's like, I guess we'll talk about sort of the technology and the influence of ICO once we get more into the weeds with its history. I guess my first question for y'all is, do you guys have any anecdotes from just, I guess, the 2000s in general, maybe not necessarily when the game came out specifically? I know a lot of us are very much Zoomers. I think I'm one of the oldest ones here. I have a little bit of a story to tell there, but like I'm curious if you guys have anything.
Yeah, no, I was in diapers when this game came out, so I got nothing. I was probably thinking of Toy Story and literally nothing else.
It's funny.
So,
go ahead.
So like coming from, I was pretty young as well, so I came to it later from Shadow of the Colossus, and this game inspired like, oh, I'm gonna be an animator. This was this whole arc in my life, even more than Shadow of the Colossus did, because I like small scale kind of things. I have like an appreciation for, and obviously like the way Shadow renders its colossi is like super crazy cool and stuff, but it didn't really speak to me personally. But ICO definitely like hit me like a bus on that front.
That's very interesting. Pang, did you still have an anecdote or something? Or
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think at least for most of us, like when I first started reading like more Games Press stuff when I was like, elementary school age, by that point Shadow of the Colossus already dropped. So ICO was very much through that lens, like sort of reevaluated classic, and then hit middle school. The ICO and Shadow of the Colossus collection drops on PS3. So I had that. Oh, actually, I remember I bought that from I read about it in Game Informer, and I bought it for my dad as a Father's Day gift. And he was like, "Oh, thank you." And then I just immediately took it down and like played it myself. He's never touched it. In fact, I think I still have the copy. I moved out like 2 years ago, and I just took the copy with me. He's like, he's never gonna play this. But it's like just the most like asshole gift I ever got my dad. But I remember I played through mostly ICO as a kid, but I didn't ever finish because I just got too scared of the shadow combat. I was like, this is too hard, and I just put it down like age 11. I remember coming back last year when I did my first full playthrough. I was like, "Oh, this is like Mesh Square Simulator." but like getting to re-experience that like as a kid and then as an adult was it's funny seeing how our like our approach and perspective on those kinds of things changes. We become more comfortable with like say combat in games and stuff like that.
I had sort of a similar first encounter with it because the first time that I even heard about ICO was in relation to Shadow of the Colossus. We kind of hinted at the idea, ICO was this very low-key kind of a financial bomb game when it dropped. And yeah, when Shadow of the Colossus came out, it felt like, again, from my perception, I was like on some forum or on just like different games media websites. I was like, yeah, this weird game kind of nowhere, and like it's super minimalist. All you do is kill bosses. It's so weird and so emotional, and it's this thing that you'd never seen before. But also it's connected to this other game, Eco, that like a lot of people forgot about. And I was like, what the fuck is Eco? And so much of the discussion again around Eco was that it didn't get the attention that it deserved. It got kind of done dirty, especially by its infamous American PS2 box art. Yeah, maybe we could show that here. It's like it's pretty wild that that's like in 2001, I think we were mostly past the weird American box art that has like nothing to do with the tone of the game that you'd be kind of used to from the 16-bit era, maybe. I'm sure all you guys, you know this fucking game called Phalanx on the Super Nintendo, where it's like this.
I was thinking the same one.
Yeah, it's the guy with the banjo.
It's funny because I had that game on Game Boy Advance as a kid, and
Oh,
it just
no.
had the most normal cover. And then, I get older, and so it's like, have you ever seen this game? I'm like, yeah, I've played Phalanx. Like, the game's pretty good. And they showed me the cover. I was like, what the fuck?
You're
Like,
like, I
what
don't
were
play
they
that.
smoking back then?
Alan and I have like mulled over this whole box art shit a lot in the past.
We have a really big list.
Yeah, eventually we got to expand the list of
Yeah.
like not necessarily the best box art, but certainly the box art
The-
of all time.
I was
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was actually curious because I was thinking about it. I was like, I wonder if anybody in this call hadn't heard of Shadow of the Colossus first.
Mm.
And I was like, that's almost definitely not the case. Shadow is like such a big, important game, and Eco is too nowadays in its own right. So I decided to look on Japanese like fandom places to see like anecdotes from people who are around then of if they played Eco, what the discussion about Eco is like, and it is like a little more notable on launch in Japan, and then pretty much exact same over there. Like literally nobody played it until Shadow dropped and they reevaluated it. So I think it's interesting how it managed to. It wasn't just a cultural thing that like nobody was there for this game when it dropped.
Rafa saying in chat, the American version was rushed early, that's why it had bad art plus missing features. Actually, yeah, when you play Eco on the PS2 now, it's advisable to actually go with the PAL version, because they actually fixed up some stuff, and it has a 60 hertz mode as well, so you're not screwed on that front. Yeah, I just remember at least here in Europe, the pricing for, specifically in Germany, the pricing for the PS2 versions of these games was kind of fucked for a while. So I, just like Pang, I couldn't play the Team Eco games until the HD version dropped. And then, as it usually happens, the prices overall kind of normalized at that point. And honestly, personally, I loved Shadow when I first played it, and I could not really gel with Eco. I didn't actually originally finish it when I got the collection, and then it took me like until maybe 5-6 years ago to actually finish it. And then I did come to appreciate it. I guess the just the difference in reception between the two games. Well, reception is weird because like obviously Eco was a very critically beloved game, but again, its influence was so low key. Whereas with Shadow, I feel like the hype for that game carried so much of the excitement for The Last Guardian after that, right?
It's culturally Shadow being the kind of the art game to like even to normies.
Yeah.
Was like, and Sony very much has like historically played a role in fostering that like art attitude, even all the way back on the PS1. So I guess it's interesting that even like looking at like advertisements for the game back then, Eco didn't get that push, even though it's like right up their alley. And also, we talked about it a little bit before the show, that they basically decided to fund this animator and slap him in a director's chair, like fresh at Sony Studios. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we were all kind of saying, dude, that like Sony's just not that based anymore. That just doesn't fucking happen. Like, God. It's just like weird to think that, specifically for The Last Guardian now, that again, like the vaporware development hell energy around this game was so intense, and then when it came out, it almost sort of mirrored ICO. It feels like it came full circle in the end, where yeah, the reception was just as kind of flat and unenthusiastic on a sort of mainstream kind of scale, which makes me very sad because like The Last Guardian is fantastic.
I think it'll probably be an interesting like touchstone because it mirrors Eco's obviously not just in a development release, but also like thematically and stuff. I think that'll be an interesting thing to just get into.
For sure. I guess.
It's a bit like Shenmue.
Oh, sorry, yeah, John.
No, I was gonna say I think The Last Guardian's a bit like Shenmue, where it's kind of like anathema to a review cycle, and
Totally.
so many of the things, so many of the things that I think give that game like its texture, the idea of like you have this animal you have this connection to. It's like, though that's the thing. If you had 5 days to review something, I don't know if you'd have the kind of generosity of spirit to
Yeah.
go, oh, this is a really interesting like thing that they've systemized, this interaction that you have between you and this creature. It's like, holy fuck, I just want to get this puzzle done so I can finish the game and write 600 words, get this thing out the door.
Yeah, that it's weird because like we always sort of eventually circle back to like complaining about the mainstream critic or critique system and how inherently kind of flawed it is and how it doesn't do a lot of games justice. It's like we know all this stuff and yet it still doesn't really make the situation better, right? It's just very frustrating.
That generosity of spirit was something I actually felt when we were tackling Shenmue, and I'm excited to see how that will transfer to games that maybe don't click with us as much in the future. And
yeah,
I'm someone who adores Eco personally, but I know like y'all probably have a different perspective than me, and I'm excited to see like since we have this environment here to like give it a proper look over. I'm excited to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I think I personally, when I finished it, I played it at a pretty sort of, I want to say developed stage of my life, right? Where I feel like I could be receptive to those, to themes and like deeper layers of a game, right? And I did really appreciate it, right? I did really enjoy the experience, but I think if I kind of expect to revisit it now and it just sort of refresh those feelings, but not necessarily, win me over, like head over heels kind of. I sort of expect it to be, kind of an 8 out of 10 again. But I guess we'll see.
Well, I think it's interesting because you mentioned the influence or Eco not having like the same level of influence, but it seems like it's like your developer. It's like a very much like your developer, like your favorite developer's favorite game.
Yes.
Because I think you'll mention this when you mentioned like the development and like the historical context. But there's so many developers where they just list this as like their favorite game, where it's like Miyazaki and the dudes who made Last of Us, Bruce Straley,
Yoko
Taro, yeah. And so I think it also has like this interesting dynamic of, I think you could go back to Shadow of the Colossus and like that structure and like those threats are so distinct to that game and haven't really been replicated.
Yeah.
Except maybe for that big orc game they made. But Eco, I feel like I've even just playing the first few minutes again, I feel like I've played so many games in the last 20 years that are like exactly this to a degree, or they're riffing on the same ideas of trying to create this relationship between you and this companion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Alan, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say like, Eco being minimalist, which is get used to hearing that word, I guess. But it in retrospect can kind of you can appreciate something like that's focused, but also it's so easy to riff on something that's minimalist that it can lose a bit of its fervor over the years, I find.
Yeah, I think that's something that Matthew Matosis kind of maybe talked about in his I think it was Meta Micro Videos too. Matthew Mimzo's a fucking favorite YouTuber. You're gonna have to get used to that. Um, and the whole video is sort of about the nature of sequels, and then he compares Journey and Abzu. Abzu obviously directed by the art director of Journey, right? And they're two games that hit very, very similar beats, and then somehow where Matthew kind of lands in that whole sort of thesis that he makes about the games is that, yeah, it feels like it lands flat because the fact that it's riffing so obviously on another game feels like it lacks sincerity in a way, and it's really hard to kind of predict like how does it actually feel if you maybe don't have that experience, right? If you don't have that comparison point, is that even fair? Is that maybe arbitrary? Is there maybe more to the difference between the two games? I find that very fascinating.
I mean, I haven't played it yet, but I mean, just knowing myself, I'm way more inclined to be charitable to something like that if it's short.
Yeah, for sure.
Because then you're not overstaying. You're not overstaying your mechanics welcome. You're making the most emotional connection you can with the depth that you have to work with. But I don't know. If it's a short game, then I'm more inclined to do something like that.
I'll also say that because of like the whole minimalist aspect of it, I think that kind of game or just piece of art it ends up becoming very like subtext heavy. Like if you want to do like an interpretive analysis of it, and something with especially us nowadays being in all of these spaces so heavily dedicated to interpretation, a lot of these games sort of get like smothered with like whereas with Shenmue, it's like I feel like that game is like I could come at that game with almost fresh eyes because a lot of I mean I've certainly read like thoughtful reviews of Shenmue, but there's still a lot of room to talk about it. Whereas just something it's like ICO or Eco, it's very so much has been written about it, so much has been like wrung from it, right? That it becomes a little hard, like especially having played the game like in full only last year. For me, I already had so many preconceptions about it going in that it all, and I think this is why, like, not to spoil my own thoughts of it, but why I sort of had like a muted response to it is that a lot of it was just affirming what I had read other places, like, oh yeah, this is about like companionship and independence, and escaping this claustrophobic space that also seems like vast in an odd way, like that weird juxtaposition. Like, it's not to say those aren't like interesting interpretations, but also like once you've already read so much about it, it's harder to slot your own thoughts in. And there's certainly like that's an issue with a lot of interpretive games, but I think because Eco gives you so little to work with, there's only so much subtext that you can wring from it, and when everyone else already has like has populated that subtext real estate, it can be hard to it's interesting to talk about nowadays because there's just so much discussion about it already.
This is the same team that made a game that inspired the one thread where they look for secrets in a game that doesn't have any for like 15 years.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Raph is saying in chat, the same thing happened to me with Shadow of the Colossus, and Bang, I'm so glad you brought that up, that sort of sensation, because that's also how I felt with Shadow, for example, where I don't want to spoil that game's themes, because maybe there's like a weird person that lived in a cave until now and they don't actually know what the game's about, so like I have a chance to not ruin it for them right now. But I guess it's this thing where you appreciate it on intellectual level more than, whoa, I'm actually pulled into this emotional experience. And it took me actually a couple playthroughs of Shadow of the Colossus to really fall in love with it. And honestly, that's also one of the reasons why I cherished The Last Guardian so much, right? Because that was the first time I could actually play one of those games at release, and then I felt like I actually got the full experience.
I wonder also like how much like games, not discourse, but just discussion in general, like affects that. Like Eco has been talked to death at this point. Shadow's been talked to death. The Last Guardian still kind of hasn't, but it's got a fair amount of discussion.
For
about
better or
it.
for worse.
Yeah, for sure. But I wonder if like maybe approaching I guess discussion of games online with like a more like hesitant to engage kind of attitude would like maybe help me enjoy games more, because I've definitely
Yeah.
experienced what y'all are talking about.
Yeah.
When I first played Resident Evil 4, actually, it did click with me on the mechanics of like this is fun. But I was like the entire time I felt like I was like listening to the review in my brain that like I've heard over the years.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, yeah, this is good because XYZ, instead of like having fun, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, this is the shit that black pilled me like on spoilers. You know, this is like why I don't watch trailers anymore at all, and don't read
Yeah.
reviews, because like I just with Shadow specifically, I hated that feeling so much that I was like, I mean, this sounds like really extreme and dramatic, but like I want to do everything to like not go through that.
Yeah.
I'm also lucky in that I played all three of these games mostly blind, and for the first two when I was like pretty young as well.
Yeah, I similarly, well, like I played Shadow when I was like relatively young. Like I had to have been, I was maybe like a freshman in high school, so not like young, but not like old yet, I suppose. And I did kind of have like a fresh experience where it's like I had heard about the game for a long time, but I wasn't quite deep in the discussion of it, so I didn't quite have the context. So like when it does kind of show its hand, I was like totally blindsided by it. Compared to like Eco, where like you when you play it, you kind of immediately know what it's about. I guess like whether someone's like told you about Eco or not. Like I think it pretty quickly like you understand what it's like trying to achieve. I guess. I mean, it's a game with like a hold hand button. You know what I mean?
That's 100% true. That's like a great point. I think that's part of like what colored my perception of it is like not. It's hard to like voice that kind of thing in a way that isn't like this snobby like, oh, okay, it's deep if you're like if you haven't experienced many of these before, like that kind of like sneering like.
Yeah.
But it is sort of like you go in and it's like, yep, this is a game about, you know, like taking care of someone, like helping, you know, like the same themes I mentioned earlier. Like and you can sort of grok that in the first 30 minutes. And I know there are scenes later on that I'm sure we can save for the next recording session we do about this. That definitely reinforce that in interesting ways, but it's not necessarily like it adds a new wrinkle. It's just like, yep, it's still the same theme. Yep, this is representing that theme really well. But you sort of get that the whole time. Yeah.
I actually wrote an analysis like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, comparing this game to Tetris. Because and I mean it's kind of overstating Eco, I think, to call it like a perfect game in the way Tetris is, obviously. But they're like both games that are like immediately transparently understandable. And Tetris building its foundation exclusively on its mechanics means that you understand them and then you just play. Whereas like you understand Eco and the point was the understanding, so you have understood it, and that's like the end.
This is really
This is
interesting.
100% true. Like I'm against like replayability as like a metric, right?
Yeah.
But I do feel like having played Tetris for most of my life, I still learn new things in Tetris.
Yeah.
Like constantly. Eco, it's like, I mean, I learned that you get a sword on the second playthrough, or like the special sword. If you go to that one place where the club was, because I read the trophy guide, I was like, oh, this will be great when I platinum the game, I guess. Oh, and then the fucking watermelon. Like, cool. But I don't think that like necessarily. I actually don't repeat playthroughs translate the
Ueda dialogue,
yeah. But then again, it's like, does removing that veil of communication really enhance the themes, or is it just like there's a weird thing with these Team Eco games where they like they're very much these like art house experiential games, etc. And then like Shadow Colossus has like the weird like lizard and fruit collectibles, which I do think it handles in a very understated like this is sort of pointless way. And yes, the fucking time attack, Raph is saying in chat, hard mode, like speed. I mean, there are people who like I was reading GameFAQs threads of people who like get really into like AI manips and stuff for Shadow of the Colossus. It's like it's all there. Like and you can tell that Ueda like had that in mind. I think ICO is a little less prone to that, even though it's got the speedrun achievement, which my dream is to have that done for the next episode. I don't know if I'm gonna follow through because it seems like a little bit of a pain. But it's funny because it's almost like they're a little bit flippant about their own work in that way, which I sort of do like that, but I don't necessarily like the mechanics in these games enough to like want to engage in that level unless I'm on a podcast about it, which I happen to be. But yeah, well, I do find that interesting about the way like they treat their own games.
So what I'm hearing is everybody needs to have a time by the next call, so we can compare for the speedrun.
Post your scores, yeah.
I just need to point out, Raph said in chat earlier that the American PS2 version of ICO turns the R1 hold hand button into a toggle.
Yeah,
that's insane.
That hurts to think about.
That
Isn't
breaks
that
my
how it
brain.
worked in real life? You just like grab someone's hand, then your hand locks up.
That's how it works for me, actually. It's called anxiety. Yeah.
No, the headcanon is that Yorda is just gripping your hand that hard back. There we go. The keynote is still funny.
I guess like now that we're on specific details of like versions, I guess we can the perfect segue go into like the development of the game. Also I guess I want to say, yeah, if you heard our experience like with spoilers and like expectations, all that, now maybe this is your cue to actually go play the game, and then come back to the podcast later. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't know.
It's a short game and an important one. Those aren't there's not enough of those. You should play those.
Yes, sir.
Am I supposed to play it now?
No, you can say. So, Raph did a fuck ton of research, like compiled all of it into a Google Doc. Very thankful for that. Thank you, Raph. Just our game knowledge overlord.
I was bored. I had something to do at 2 a.m.
So, we were aware that Ueda started. He has a arts degree. He is an animator by trade, but then at some point decided to join the games industry, and he worked with Kenji Ino on I think the weird Dreamcast, or is it Dreamcast, like visual novel?
It was 3DO.
Oh, 3DO, dude, what the?
So it was 3DO, and then there's, I believe, Saturn and PlayStation versions.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
D2 is Dreamcast, right? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, D2. That's the one that's like the weird, like one of the rare Japanese first-person shooters, and it's like the snowy. Yeah, it's like because D1 is like an FMV game, but I think from what I was reading, Ueda did a little bit of touch-up work on the D Director's Cut PlayStation version, and then was mainly working on Enemy Zero, which is so Ino had this whole thing about he had this digital actress. I'm forgetting the name. If you can, do you?
No idea.
No. Okay. Yeah, they basically had this like CG model they made of a lady, and they did D, where she plays like this character is like investigating this cannibal. All I remember is that I read that it was terrible when I was like 6 years old in a Game Informer for top 10 worst horror games ever made. But it looks very cool, but it is also an FMV game. So Enemy Zero is a game where it's the same character, but it's like a sci-fi, also horror-esque game. I've never played it myself. All I know about it is that the enemies are invisible, and then they sort of, there's like a Doppler effect mechanic. John is tagging in for, he says digital actress is Laura. That was the name of their digital actress. So you're basically, if I understand it correctly, you can tell how close enemies are and where they're coming from based on like stereo like noises they make, and the Doppler effect tells you how close they are. So it's like basically the pitch changes like depending on like how close they are. correct someone else may like understand more about that than me, but I've never played it because that premise sounds really cool and also like really fucking hard to play. And it does tie nicely because Eno also did like that's whole idea of like using senses other than visual senses as like a way to interact with the game, because he also did Real Sound, which is a famous game for the blind that he did. So anyway, he, according to Raph's notes and like interviews, with Eno basically was like, yeah, Ueda wasn't necessarily the best like artist or the fastest or more talented or whatever, but he was an excellent like concepts creator. So having him on to like create concept art and just like apparate these like intricate, interesting ideas out of his head, like that was the reason he was on staff. But he was also only there for a year and a half, from what I understand from reading. And he moved to Japan Studio pretty quickly afterwards.
Yeah, I think
Japan Studio being the Japan Studio being the, for those who do not know, the Sony Computer Entertainment, like basically their in-house developer that bootstrapped all these random other developers that were working on their own. Like good example is Jumping Flash. Those games, I forget the name of that company, but they'd done this game Geograph Seal. They wanted to make a version for PlayStation. Japan Studio went is like, we'll help you port it and do all that stuff. Same for like Arc the Lad and those I think Rapid Reload's one of them. There's the Crime Crackers, like the really weird Japanese first person shooter that was like launch title on there. So if you look at Japan Studios like list of games, like they probably did like 20 or 30 random shitty PS1 games, shitty and not shitty PS1 games before eventually starting with their own games, one of which off the top of my head, Ape Escape. They're very famous for that series.
Yeah.
But at some point in that, like their PlayStation, like working PlayStation games, Ueda joined the team, and one of y'all can tag in because this is the part I'm not as familiar with.
I guess I'm just gonna add like so Japan Studios' role as like a support team. They did that on like all the way until the PS4 era with stuff like Gravity Rush 2 or Bloodborne even. And ironically, The Last Guardian, and now they're kind of gone, I think, or at least like significantly downsized.
They all got rolled into whatever the team was that did Astro's
Sobi, I think is their name.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
That was a Japan. I think the first one was a Japan Studio game, and then basically the Gravity Rush team, that was Toyama's team. He was the guy who directed Silent Hill 1. He did the Siren games for Sony Computer Entertainment, then the 2 Gravity Rush games, and then he was Ghost after that. I think he and his team left, a bunch of other important members left, and basically it was just the team of Sobi people are the ones who have taken on that Japan Studio mantle, which,
Yeah.
you know, I like their stuff fine, but it obviously is not as engaging as like the full-on games they're making, or like helping Bloodborne, Demon Souls, like all that kind of stuff.
I'm also told. Oh, sorry, Alan.
I was just saying the name. Sobi is the Japanese word for play. So
Oh, that's kind of sick. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think a lot of the Japan Studio people that didn't go to Asobi, I think a lot of them are Nintendo now. That's something I heard, I think.
really,
Yeah. I think... Okay, this is like not connected to Japan Studio, but I think the cutscene director for the Silent Hill games, which obviously again that was Team Silent, not Japan Studio, but he worked on like the recent Paper Mario games, and that tracks totally because they look fucking amazing, sort of in terms of the lighting and all that. I feel like there's a lot of like sort of linkage there.
what a through line.
Yeah. Raph, I think you got the scoop on sort of how Ueda started at Sony and like how he got the directorial position there, right?
Oh yeah, he wanted to join Sony because he was really impressed with Parappa the Rapper. The idea of this famous illustrator actually working on a video game sort of connected this idea of like video games as art for him. He set up an interview in the hopes that like maybe they might hire me, and they hired him on the spot.
Ooh.
And he was like, wait, guys, I have this movie thing I'm working on. I need time to take to like actually build this for myself. I'm really passionate about it. And they just said, okay, do it here. right? We'll give you the technology, we'll give you the computers to finish this movie. And then that movie, he made it. He showed it to the execs. They suggested, "Hey, make a game out of this," and that's how he got the director's role for ICO. It's kind of
So based.
He's based. He's cool.
The serendipity there is like, dude, without Parappa the Rapper, like the tiny domino is Parappa the Rapper, and the big domino is like Dark Souls, like because Miyazaki got inspired by ICO, and yeah.
It's funny. This is another connection that we have with Shenmue, because he started development on ICO during the PlayStation era. So there's like this very elaborate PS1 tech demo you can look up online, where this it basically just is ICO. It's just, slightly,
it's so cool.
Yeah, it's wild. It you see that kind of game. It's still got all of the very smooth camera panning and lovely animations. Oh right, they could have done this on PlayStation. It's just most developers were not up to that task. But there's a funny thing it shares with Shenmue, because of course Shenmue has its incredibly elaborate, oh my god, cannot believe they did this, the tech demos for Shenmue and Saturn. I just thought that was a funny little connection. They started on the previous platform and then got ported to the later one to even further expound on the technical effort they were undertaking.
The final version of ICO actually still it exhibits some of the characteristics of a PS1 game, specifically in the fact that it runs at 240p. I'm not sure. I think John from Digital Foundry, I think he made a video about the game, and I think he talked about that, but I didn't rewatch it to refresh myself on that. I'm not sure if there actually is a connection there, if they actually ran it at 240p because it started on PS1 or something. That probably doesn't make sense, but
I would imagine that it was probably just a technical limitation, because I've been playing Shadow of the Colossus, I have a widescreen CRT, right? So I'm playing on there. I'm man, this is pretty crunchy, and especially in anamorphic, even with component cable. I looked at the resolution. I forget what the exact number of vertical lines is, but it's less than 300. So it's got basically quote unquote high resolution for that time in the horizontal, so columns, but then the rows, it's still PS1 era. I don't know if it's quite 280. I don't think it's exactly 280, but it's it's higher than 240. But it's damn, even for that game, which obviously that game runs like shit on PS2, but which is a big positive, mind you. But they even just to get that level of performance, they had to go with this very truncated vertical resolution. So I would imagine it just made their life easier for ICO on PS2 to go with that retro low res look, because especially I played the HD port when I played it, and it is an extremely gorgeous game and very very profound in terms of its its lighting dynamics and its physics model, its kinematics model. It's astounding how well they did. I would not be surprised if they mainly went with that resolution just to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think I just actually remembered some of the details behind that, because I think the early PS2 dev kits, they had some weird issues, and a lot of the early PS2 devs, they opted for field rendering at that time. So where obviously we know now interlaced video, the way the video arrives at your TV is you only get half the lines of what the actual resolution is, and then it alternates frame by frame. And then with field rendering, it does it actually on a rendering level, where the console actually physically only outputs. Yeah, it outputs half the lines in one frame, then the other half on the next frame. And I think that was Luke just posted the domino meme. Yeah, it's on the early dev kits, I think you either did that or you ran at 240p. And then I think if you do field rendering, I think there's also a weird thing where you're sort of forced to run at 60 FPS as well. So, and that's why a lot of the early PS2 games are 60 FPS. Yeah, and I think ICO, I would imagine maybe that just was not a realistic target for them, so pick 240p instead. And I guess I was mentioning it because like it's just interesting when you go back to the game now. I'm imagining a common experience might be, okay, you plug your PS2 with component cables into like an HD TV or something. I think that's not too crazy of a setup. And then you're like, why the fuck doesn't it work? Because most HD TVs.
That happened to me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Most HD TVs, they don't allow 240p over component, or they just interpret it weirdly or incorrectly.
I didn't even realize. I mean, I knew like plugging certain cables into an HD TV is just a recipe for funny bits, but yeah, I didn't realize that specifically.
I remember this is a little bit off topic, but this was one of the biggest issues when my friends and I were trying to play JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Heritage of the Future on Dreamcast, because it only outputs at 240p. It was like, well, that's what it output on the CPS3, so that's what we're going to output on here. And finding a TV that would output that is like, not like impossible, but it is a little bit of a nightmare. So I would imagine for Eco, if you try to play it like that nowadays, yeah, same issue.
Yeah. There's just so many myths kind of surrounding why you don't get an image out of certain games on the PS2, and like that's the reason. I think a lot of people don't actually know that. Yeah.
There's an interesting through line with Shenmue about like both like cinematic focus and also like technical expertise of the teams, because these are both first party games for their respective consoles, and both of them obviously have that cinematic angle, what with Ueda being an animator and Shenmue's like obvious film influences and stuff. And that is like another big part of this gen, I guess.
Yeah, Luke was mentioning earlier when we were going in the inverse kinematics, so the fact that limbs can react to surfaces, and like in a way that's actually procedural, right? It's not it's not a predetermined animation or something, and like stuff like that, and then bloom lighting. I'm sure there's other games that use that sort of thing before Eco.
Eco cursed us with bloom.
I can't think of any off the top, but that's one of the things that makes Eco one of the most weirdly influential games ever. I do remember that being cited, like that being one aspect that was cited a lot. That was kind of crazy about the game.
Well, it's interesting because that like looking at those inverse kinematics as like something like important did, because if you look back at one of Ueda's big influences, Prince of Persia, that game was known for sort of a similar thing in 2D with the rotoscoping. These very fluid animations, even on like these older microcomputers, and you can see a lot of that even in the game design of Eco, like very much focusing on these like very like fluid movement, fluid jumping. There's a lot of you can see that through line very clearly from like, and I think it'd be fair to call Eco like one of the first 3D cinematic platformers. It's not like really a genre, but it's sort of you can tell it drew heavily from that, like Another World, Prince of Persia. I know Raph, you brought up in your research that he was heavily inspired by Lemmings. If you wanted to like go further on that.
Oh, he was impressed by how like you could kill your lemmings but still win every level as long as you didn't kill too many. He was kind of rambling. It didn't make any sense to me, honestly. I've reread that part like 5 times. I'm still confused. Like, yeah, Lemmings was when I knew games were art. Like, what? He said it multiple times too. I'm still very confused.
It's like Japanese interview translated syndrome.
Yeah. Raph just posted a list of influences in the chat here, and there's a lot of like if you're like an old anime head, some of these are more obvious, like Akira and Nazca, but Galaxy Express 39, written out as 999 to be clear. I don't know how I didn't see that before, like that connection, but it's interesting to see a director with like such specific influences, and like like everybody talks about like Kojima and stuff. They like name a bunch of 80s movies he's a big fan of or whatever. But it's interesting to see like a more niche medium as like specific as anime here. show through so clearly in someone's work, I guess.
Yeah. And I guess to go maybe back to the Bloom thing, I know Alan, you had like jokingly said like, "Oh, okay, this curses with Bloom." I mean, I'm sure you're not a universal like Bloom hater, right?
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah. It's just like it's so interesting that it took another generation for that to be like a whole trend, right? I feel like it wasn't
Yeah.
until Gen 7, again the gen after that,
The desert gen.
yeah, that Bloom became just absurdly fucking common. And again, sort of like we implied at the start, like I feel like Eco got its due more around when Shadow of the Colossus came out, and that was obviously the twilight of the Beach Gen. And then you had more and more developers saying, "Oh yeah, this was actually super fucking influential." And then earlier we had the Parappa Dark Souls joke, because again there's a very interesting parallel there where Hidetaka Miyazaki came from outside the game industry, and Eco, supposedly is what inspired him to want to make games. So it's just crazy that this tiny little game that bombed so hard that nobody kind of gave a shit about when it came out had all these ripple effects.
Yeah, and like in the Japanese games industry, especially like specifically like the industry people around Sony, like people at Sony Japan Studios that we've been talking about. It's like you'll see. I was looking for interviews from Ueda. I found interviews that mention Ueda a lot. Like I would say like 1 in 10 interviews I found that had his name in them were someone else talking about like his work influencing them, or a couple of anecdotes about how he got people jobs places. So it seems like he paid that favor forward of being thrown the director's role so early. He tried to show that same love to other people.
It's pretty sick.
It's also funny that, like, in the Western gaming landscape, they were very heavily inspired by just like the way the movement worked, and that kind of like moving from like this very fluid, like moving from cliff to vine and like all these various objects. I think the clearest one that came after this was, ironically enough, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, which is like I've referred to it before as like the non-experiential version of this game. like if you just slap like a shitty story and abysmal combat on basically taking what this game sort of like alludes to in terms of its puzzle design, because I wouldn't call this like I like most of the puzzles in this game, but I wouldn't say it has like any sort of like obstacle escalation or like really digs into like what makes its puzzles tick beyond being sort of like going for like something naturalistic and like very like object interaction based. And then Sands of Time is like, well, what if we turn that into like a damn like traditional platformer kind of thing? I think the other big one people would point to is Uncharted, of course, where they were like, we have like this just Gears ripoff cover shooter system. What if we just padded the rest of it out with Eco? Which,
holy shit! I've never heard anyone say that before, but I'm losing it.
I mean, it sort of is, right?
yeah. You know,
like the magnetism and
because
Assassin's Creed in there.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
I need to put a few more dominoes on that picture I posted earlier, I guess.
It's funny
because it ripples out in all directions.
It feels like on the Japanese side, like they took like more the experiential aspects. Which not to say that there aren't like Western games that do that. I think
The Last of Us,
point is like Papo EO. It's like a popular indie one that's sort of it's sort of like Ueda-esque. Maybe I might be going too far to say it's specifically Eco, but because it's got definitely like all of his works in there, more or less. I think that might have come out before Last Guardian. I've never fucking played it, but I'd almost go as far. This is a weird one. I would say Brother Tale of Two Sons reminds me of Eco in a sense.
No, yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
The actual director said ICO.
Oh, hey, okay, cool. I was like floating one there, so I'm glad that was right. But that one gives me sort of vibes of this game. I think, but there's definitely like a lot of like, you have something that I think a lot of people would point to as like art house, like very, like I was talking about earlier, like heavily like subtextual and very built in this like relationship between you and the AI, as many of Ueda's games are. And there's a decent amount of Western games that sort of like look, there's like, damn, you can jump from ledge to ledge. That's fucking crazy, bro. There's like a vine in this game. You can swing on it. I think Prince of Persia actually does a good job at like, what if we made this into our in all capitals real ass game. Some of the other ones are just sort of like, yeah, it's like padding. But it is interesting how you'll hear a lot of people mention it as an influence, and then it's not always in like, I was really moved by it. It's like, oh, I didn't realize you could make a 3D game that was like this, and they proceeded to make a 3D game that was like this.
We've got to.
This sounds like a whoops moment in terms of influence.
It's actually bad. Fuck Ueda. Fun fuck Shadow of the Colossus too.
Bloom and Assassin's Creed. Come
This
on,
happens. This happens all the time, though. It's just like Witch Time and Bay or whatever.
Yeah. We gotta do a relationship chart. Like how many steps to your is your game from the director saying it was based on ICO?
But now that I think
degrees
about
of
it,
ICO.
like Shadow of the Colossus is the original piss filter game in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would not have Resident Evil 5 if it wasn't for Shadow of the
That's so
Colossus.
fire.
Shadow of the Colossus is Resident Evil 5 is literally RE4 improved by adding Shadow of the Colossus. It's even got an AI companion you have to take care of.
Oh my god, stop.
It's the Ueda Resident Evil.
I was actually thinking that with RE4. I was wondering if Ashley was originally like a riff on Ueda.
Yeah, it's like Mikami looked at Iko and was like, well, what if Yorda wouldn't have sex with you? He made a fucking game like that.
The bold question.
It was like, it's not horny enough yet. Yeah.
Oh my god.
I could do better.
It is interesting though, because there've been plenty of like escort systems since, and I feel like the idea of having an AI companion that's sort of like it's uncommon of like a game of this era to have like a sort of reactive AI companion. Like you get a lot of ones that are like on this little scripted path, and they might stop in place to shoot enemies or something.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, it's a lot. I feel like it's a lot more common / expected, and I feel like just obviously like the relation between you and Yorda like is very artistically like what the game is rooted in, right? But it feels like also like just her AI in general, like being able to like semi-realistically interact with the environment, like sort of on her own go to like look at stuff that you're like might need to like interact with next, and she'll play with the birds and interact sort of like realistically with the shadows that try to kidnap her. I feel like just that on a technical level is one of the big innovations that this game brought.
Yeah, and I think going off the tech side of it, I guess there is an obvious link to be made there between this game and The Last Guardian, because it feels like a much more expanded version of those ideas in a way. I read one anecdote that I sort of didn't really get what Ueda was saying, but it was still kind of interesting, where he stated that one of his goals with Shadow of the Colossus was to emphasize the Colossi as like adversaries to the goal of like resurrecting this girl that you have at the start of the game. I'm sort of interpreting like the quote that I saw, and like again, that's the part that I didn't really get. And Ueda was saying, yeah, I was surprised to learn that instead the thing that players latched onto the most was the relationship between the protagonist and the horse, right? And then that inspired him to take another stab at the companion idea, and this time sort of focus on an animal and like really flesh that out. And I don't know how many of us here have played The Last Guardian, but it's just you know,
So good.
Yeah, it is insanely fucking good. And also, yeah, I remember Matthew Matos as well reciprocating this when he played it that year, the year it came out, is that I've never seen a game do this kind of thing with AI, with a companion before, where
No.
it feels so... It's cheesy to say it like that, but it feels so real. And I guess this is cool that over this like insane span of time, with still a pretty small core team that never really changed in that time, they were still innovating on a technical level. For their whole duration.
I think The Last Guardian will also probably offer us like a interesting frame of analysis like that. That when I remember when in the wait between Shadow and The Last Guardian, there was all this like interpretive speculation about the lore of this world that I don't particularly care for, not to dismiss people who do, but I think ICO and Shadow feel a little more disparate by themselves, and then The Last Guardian somehow turns it into a trilogy, regardless of the lore, like thematically.
Yeah, that again is like such an obvious thing to say now, but it does like on a very surface level, it feels like a combination of the two games. But then when you play it, it actually does, right? It actually feels like it fully realizes. It realizes like the massive imposing scale of this foreign creature, while also again making it this true companion. That's Aggro, the horse in Shadow, and Ueda sort of hinted at vaguely. Fuck, dude, I love that game.
It's so good. Not Beach Gen though, tragically.
Yeah, once we run out of games, then I'm excited for us to,
gen.
I was gonna say I'm excited for us to be like the Bloom gen, the Gothic ruins, Gears of War ruins gen.
Yeah, I think I made a joke during the Shenmue episode where I literally said we should just like talk about Last Guardian and make note of the release date, because it just feels like a game of that generation anyway. Just pass it off like a Beach Gen game. PS2 game endearing.
Looks like a PS2 game. PS2 games look great.
You said my sleeper phrase.
Like this exact thing came up like during the Shenmue episode as well. Yeah, we need to find a way to sneak that in every episode now.
Yeah.
I'm still scared of that because it means we're gonna cover Lost Planet. I never want to play that game again.
It's not that bad, bro.
No,
I'm sure it holds up.
No, bro.
Dang, I feel like that is your most commonly held opinion about games, is that you never want to play them.
There's very few I want to. That's why I'm an anti-replayability guy. Like, there's games I would like at gunpoint I'd play again, and then there's like games I like would actually like. I would just rather get shot. Sands of Time, the most Sunshine. Like Sunshine. I already have replayed so many fucking times. It's like I probably would replay it again just because I like it's brainless for me now. But it doesn't mean I like it. Worst one was definitely Jets of Radio Future. Yeah.
There we go. I was remember
game is on a Sega system, running at 20 FPS. Very weird and janky, and he never replays it again.
That's what I've been saying. We need to do the Blue Stinger Illbleed episode.
The Dreamcast port of Metal Gear Rising.
So
Zero replayability.
I would be curious. I know we discussed at the start, but like maybe Hoplock and John, like what are your thoughts going in like in more detail, and like what you're looking forward to with like playing Eco?
You go first.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, my experience with Ueda's games is just that I played Shadow Classes a long time ago. I mean, I kind of remember the gist of it, but I don't remember that well. I mean, generally, I'm more of in games I'm more mechanically focused, but I'd like to think I can appreciate experiential stuff too. So I guess what I'm looking for is, yeah, I guess how, I don't know, I'm hoping it's going to be a sort of focused experiential setup that won't overstay its welcome, etc., etc. Well, I don't know, or just maybe it's like a really good movie that's like 3 hours or whatever that you're holding a controller for.
I guess like one thing to hope for is that the maybe the limitations of the setup and the mechanics don't impede on the emotions that the game's kind of going for. Because I feel like
Yeah.
that's. I feel like when I think about games like Uncharted, I mean it's kind of a meme to dunk on Uncharted, but I think setting your story up in a way where a lot of it is forced walking at a set speed through a confined environment, that's not good, man. I mean, this just doesn't work. And yeah, I think there's a way to be minimal and to not have deep systems, but it's still engaging, hopefully, right? And I want to hope Eco is still that for me, and for you guys as well when you get to it.
Yeah. There's also, I mean, one of the greatest games ever made, I think, is Rain World. So I think that'll basically be what I'm comparing it to the whole time.
Yeah.
The pantheon of games comparison angle is like something I've like tried to slip away from more as of late, but it's like with Eco, it's especially funny because of the influences we've talked about. It's like everybody cribbing from it means I kind of I'm worried on this replay, honestly, now that I've played so many more games, that I'm gonna be like, oh, actually, I definitely preferred this here, especially with The Last Guardian in mind.
Yeah, that's because in my head, I've lately said like that Eco might be Ueda's like cleanest game, but that like The Last Guardian is my favorite. But that's without an Eco replay under my belt, so I'm interested in seeing how that holds up.
Yeah, it's Ueda's Tetris.
Yeah, exactly. See, it always comes back to Tetris.
Klonoa clears.
Oh no! Hold on.
Klonoa good.
That's an inside joke, yeah. John, what about you?
I think as with the other games we've covered, I think I'll begrudgingly like it. And I know Alan mentioned this because the idea of like you're playing something where it's like the culture has already sort of dictated what to think about it. And I know I experienced that not with this game, but with Silent Hill 2. I remember going and playing that, and you're like, oh, yeah, this is a manifestation of a psyche, and this is he's always descending in this area. That probably says a lot about the game. But I guess you didn't have that visceral like this really resonated with me, or there's like that chemistry. I think that's probably what's going to happen. I know that's sort of like, when I booted up Eco, the few times I've tried to play it, it's like I've been going in with that expectation. So I am interested to see, because I know what I know what bookends the game, but I don't know what kind of fills it out. So I am interested to see like what are my thoughts in some of those scenarios or platforming sections or whatever.
Yeah, I guess in a way it is healthy to have those expectations to not set yourself up for disappointment, and maybe even to set yourself up to be surprised. I do think Eco, not to spoil it, but like, I think it is a very visually stimulating game. There's a lot of really just beautiful just screens and scenes. I think just enjoying it on that level is still very, I don't know, something that I at least look forward to.
I do think for most of these influential games, I mean, if you kind of like, take your mind at like, step back a little bit, I think it's even for like very influential games, it's really common for them to have done something better than all the other people who copied them. That's like almost every game where I'm like, oh, this is extremely influential. I go to play it, it's like, oh, but there's this part that nobody else copied correctly.
It's actually weirdly common when you think about it.
That's extreme. I think that's like, 95% of cases.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like that's. I guess it's a thing with discourse as well, that because the discourse mostly picks up the surface level details, the stuff that was lost is also not kind of lamented, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I think this came up with the Shenmue discussion as well, where again, so many people will tell you, "Oh, just play Yakuza," because there's not that sort of that framework where you're even looking at the things that Yakuza might be missing compared to Shenmue, or why those things have value in the first place. Ralph saying, "Just watch a movie instead of playing Shenmue."
It's kind of like this isn't just specific to games, but we're talking about games. That whole does that? Oh, actually, I guess there's the Miyazaki quote of "Anime was a mistake." Yes, that Miyazaki, not the Souls one. And he's talking about this legacy of the insular anime community being inspired by anime only, and drifting further and further from the derivatives on derivatives on derivatives on derivatives. And we've already talked about how some of ICO's spawn, if you will, is start to feel like, oh, what if we just ICO'd this instead of like, I guess a thoughtful reflection on like what worked and didn't in ICO.
Yeah, I think as far as like specific design choices of the game go, like, I mean, one thing that I'm really intrigued about is the holding hands mechanic, right, where you hold the button to stick to Ueda. This is one of the big memes of the game. It's kind of a dumb way to put it, but yeah, I think we'll talk about that. It makes more sense to talk about that kind of thing once we sit down again. Once we all have it fresh in our mind again. Does anybody else have anything they want to talk about for today?
I should mention that for ICO, Ueda specifically hired people who were outside of the games industry, who didn't have preconceived notions of what a game is. And because his whole idea with ICO was to make something new, make something unique, make something that felt fresh. And in a way, he was validated with that premise, because his like neighboring studios in the office would sometimes walk over and see ICO, and they would always ask, like, why isn't there an interface? Like, why isn't there a symbol that tells you how Yorda's feeling? What's with this hand-holding mechanic, right? So I think in a way he was validated, right? He knew that if he had normal devs on this game, it would be a very conventional, very maximalist experience instead of the minimal experience we have now.
It's funny reading. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, reading the interview between like Toyama and Ueda, and Toyama being the Gravity Rush director. Toyama remembers at the time that like he saw like the trailers and stuff for ICO, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't know we were publishing like this Western game that looks like really Japanese. Like, it's cool that Western devs are like taking more inspiration from our games." And then like later down the line, he's like, "Oh, they literally made that in like the office next to us, and I just never went over there."
That's amazing.
That anecdote is so fascinating to me, Raph. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about that in relation to the specific design choices of the game. Because again, I guess there's the element of the game just had this insane level of influence, and maybe it's because it's, it was mostly made by outsiders, right? I find that idea just so fucking crazy, and I don't know, you could relate it to how the games industry is kind of now, and the example that Al mentioned with Miyazaki, anime is a mistake, blah, blah. There's probably a lot of fucking extrapolation you could do there. But I guess maybe that's it for our first session, unless anybody has anything they want to talk about.
I can't think of anything.
Okay, then.
I think we covered about as much as we can before we actually get into like specifics, which I feel like we'll talk about next.
Yeah.
No,
I was thinking.
I
have an idea.
But let's hear it.
No, I was going to say that Ueda has said that he believes games are art, and one of the things that they're particularly capable of is being empathy machines, which is interesting because you kind of see that as a through line with all three of his games.
I think that's totally true.
But
Empathy machines is such a funny combination of
I
words.
think even Rain World is an empathy machine of sort. It's just not for a companion, but for a different
A little guy.
facet. Well, no, it's for a
Like for
different
the
facet of
ecosystem, maybe?
existence of
Yeah.
you. Yeah, yeah, it's
Did-
a yeah.
Did I misread this, or did he also say that Shadow Colossus is not art?
He said it's not art. He said he doesn't think of it as high art. No.
That's so
Oh.
awesome. I agree. He's so fucking right.
Okay, it's been 3 weeks and we're back. We took 3 weeks to play this 5-hour video game. It's Monday for us, currently. We were actually supposed to record this 2 days earlier. And it was really hilarious to realize. I thought I was gonna be super late. I literally finished the game last minute. I was so embarrassed, and then it turned out that's exactly what everybody else also did. And then Alan's PC exploded, and everybody had an anxiety attack.
It exploded at the thought of eco discourse in the year of 2023.
Yeah. But now we're here. Now we're discussing. I think we all finished the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think a good number of us played the PAL PS2 version, as we discussed. There's also a couple of us that played it on PS3, which is also based on PAL, so they're very, very similar. Yeah, do PS3 people maybe have thoughts on sort of the differences? Yeah.
So
Alan, you played
I was
both
actually
recently, yeah.
yes, and one killed my PS2, and then discussing the other killed my PC. So I don't know what's going on there. Haunted video game. So I was actually kind of surprised at how much I didn't notice changes between the PS3 and the PS2 version. Like you told me before I went in what they were, and so I was like able to consciously point them out. But like I had like a remarkably pleasant time with it outside of shitty DualShock 3s.
Yeah, it's kind of it's such a clean, like, unobjectionable remaster. It's very easy to recommend, and it's kind of a shame that Shadow of the Colossus, by comparison, had a lot of problems. Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. So we have a bunch of people here who weren't present last time, and obviously, like, a bunch of those are newcomers, and I'm really interested to hear what y'all think about the game. Like, those who played it for the first time. I think Heather, you weren't present last time, right?
Yeah, I had never played Eco. Well, I had played like about like the first maybe like 20 or so minutes of it, and then I just sort of put it down. With me, like I played Shadow of the Colossus a lot back when I was in high school, and you know, I played the crap out of the game, and it was one of my favorites. And Eco was always sort of interesting because it felt so much like smaller scaled by comparison that I never really felt the urge to play it. It felt a little bit too like rudimentary to me. And in actually playing it now, it was sort of what I expected it would be in a lot of ways, but there were a lot of areas where I was like, you know, actually sort of impressed. And I do think it sort of, you know, stands on its own and is like worthwhile in, you know, Ueda's body of work.
Yeah, I'm glad that it had some value for you still, because I think that's not there's some division in this group. Let's put it that way.
So even last episode we talked about how knowing what eco is kind of tells you everything about eco.
Yeah.
And how it can kind of mess with the value the experience has. I actually came away having like a better time than I expected after that discussion point. So we've got a couple of eco defenders in here, but maybe someone else wants to share their perspective.
I have some thoughts on that, what you just said, Alan, about like how the game sort of, just knowing about the game tells the whole story kind of. I have some thoughts about like maybe why that is specifically, but we could talk about that.
Yeah.
John, I think you expressed sort of some dissent with the game, but like the whole time I wasn't sure how much of it
Yeah, I
was
did.
trolling.
No, it was genuine. I think the joke I made when we were talking about like floating the idea of doing eco was like it's been like the most immersive game ever because you get to that first bench and then they fall asleep and then I fall asleep. That was like I think I did this. I think I did the same thing everyone else, or many people have kind of expressed, where like played Shadow. This game's awesome. You fight monsters. You play eco, and it seems like kind of small in comparison. I guess finishing it, I have a few thoughts, and the two big ones, and these are sincere. I mean them both. Okay, one, I stand by. Okay, this game is like boring. I was like really, it was like pulling teeth towards the end. And then two, I think everyone should play it. I don't know if we've ever like explicitly said, like or talked to the audience with anything we've discussed. But this is like, especially as like as for like games culture, I think this is one of the games that is the most like enlightening to play through. Because we talked about it in the last episode, but it's like there are so many like there are so many particular design trends that I think you can trace back to this game. And I was even thinking about stuff like, is the collision detection in Demon Souls, is that based off this game? Is that based off Eco? Or there's like one puzzle you need to climb up some windowsills, and you can see there's like some boarded up windows, and one of them is illuminated. And I was like, okay, every
Naughty
brain
Dog.
dead level designer, yeah, I was like, this is why there's yellow paint in every fucking Naughty Dog game. Holy shit! And so I think it's like if you have any interest in like games as a medium, I think this is a game that you kind of owe yourself to like play through, and you might hate it as much as I do, but I think you'll walk away with maybe a broader sense of like the history of games, like and so much stuff that I think in the last 20 years you can trace this directly back to Eco.
Yeah, for those who weren't present last time, we did the meme of like the tiny domino that is Eco, then all the way to like Dark Souls. That is something I agree with you, John. That is something you can definitely feel. Even just like I was startled how much the climbing felt like Uncharted, and how
Yeah.
then that's the thing. Like so many games feel like they copy Uncharted now specifically, and then it gets sort of lost that it actually maybe originally came from this other game. I'm like curious. I think Pang, you maybe you used to be like a little bit higher on the game when you first played it, and now you're kind of more tepid, or how did that kind of work?
I mean, so I think the bit I've been doing is that this game fucking sucks. I think it's one of these hard things. I think we had been talking about my Snake Eater review on Backlogged, where I sort of had this similar sentiment. It's like one of my favorite games from high school, and I replay it in grad school, and I'm like 5 or 6 years or 7 years later, and I was like, I don't know. I think Eco, very similar thoughts on my end. It's like I know I don't I think Eco is like a good game, and like lowercase g good, not uppercase g good. I think last year when I played for the first time, I thought it was an uppercase g good game. Not a great game, but one that was interesting. I think that it sort of ties into like comments I've made before about like replayability is a bad metric, where I think this is a game that it hits once first time, and then especially trying to play it like less than a year after I played it last time. I mean, I think actually probably just like 11 months after. I think this was like it's only played in June of last year. A lot of the experiential aspects, especially in terms of like perceiving the entire castle for the first time, and like getting to know Yord and all that, hit a lot harder when you don't already know the beats of the game, right? And then coming in and trying to like, it's not something I can really like sink my teeth into. I think it is in a lot of ways a very shallow game. So yeah, on this playthrough, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I actually don't know if I enjoyed like a single second of it. It gets, but I mean, I had the same thing with Silent Hill 2 earlier this year. Like, I don't know if I really enjoyed replaying Silent Hill 2, but I still really like that game. Eco is sort of in my mind is like I don't know if I would even say it's as I think the qualities that it best exhibits, I don't know if I would say that it's a must play like John did in terms of like understanding the medium. I do have thoughts along those lines though that I'll share later. But yeah, this is definitely it's like I experienced this once because I want to write about I do write about games. I need to understand this game, but it's not necessarily something that I'm like, oh my god, I adore this game. I want to keep playing it, So that's basically where I lie with this game, having just replayed it.
Mm.
You're talking about replayability as a metric, and I agree with you on that. I don't think it's like a very great one. I was thinking about like the large amount of people who don't replay games. Like the vast majority of people don't really replay games much unless it's something that's more open-ended or multiplayer or something. And in that context, I was thinking about ICO from the lens of like a first-party, like it's not a AAA game, but it is in that same like space with some of those games, and a lot of them obviously took design from it. And I think it's discussed as this like niche art house romp from like the guy who did the crazy thing later, but it's like very much like a AAA kids game. Like you don't replay it. There's this whole idea in like art criticism of like accessibility versus like meaning, like compromising on your meaning for accessibility. And Eco is like the most generally understandable video game ever. Like you don't have to get anything to get Eco, really. It's very simple. And so and it controls very simply, it's a very broadly accessible game in a way. And in the context of AAA games, I think it's respectable because it's way more concise, and way more aware of what it is. It's a lot less pandery, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about is that for me, my last playthrough of Eco happened a lot longer ago, and what Pang says makes me wonder if, had the experience been fresher in my mind, would I have maybe enjoyed it less? Because I did really enjoy it on this playthrough. I would generally agree. Like, yeah, it's like a nice 7. It's how I would like. The numbers are stupid, but like that's where I would, just to give you a vague understanding like where I feel. I guess like when we say that a game is replayable, usually that expresses something about some deeper kind of truth about how the game is made, right? It says, okay, maybe the game is like very versatile, the mechanics work in a certain way that they're just more intrinsically enjoyable somehow. And usually the way I think about games is that I had a similar feeling with like 13 Sentinels, for example, where if I were to play it again, I would probably still enjoy it for the qualities that it does possess. But I think I would never, like on any playthrough, even the first one, I would probably never love it as much as a game that has those inherent replayable qualities. Does that sort of make sense? Because Shadow of the Colossus was always my favorite of the trilogy because it has that element, I feel like.
I kind of get that, and I've like found a lot of value in like spending more time with less games as of late. But I guess I feel a lot of people probably think the same way. Is like I don't feel a need to do like update my experience with the game. Like I played Metal Gear Rising when it came out, and I thought it was cool as shit. And that is an opinion that has aged, especially for anybody who has like replayed that game. But I guess my current experience with that game doesn't invalidate my former one.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, for me, it's not even the case that I had different levels of opinion, like at different stages of my life. It's just that no, even on the first playthrough, I felt like, yeah, this is probably not the kind of game that has that thing I'm looking for, right? And that inherently also makes it less replayable, right? And that is sort of, I don't know. It's like,
I put out that recent article, the whole like state space representation thing, right? and that article sort of built and like the summary for someone listening to this, because I'm not saying like, oh, go read it, because it is sort of dense and dry, but it's sort of about like how can we like sort of empirically express like the complexity and depth of a game and like all these different metrics around it, like viability of actions and the breadth of options and all this, through analyzing like the different states in the game, right? And I think it's sort of if you look at how between Shadow of the Colossus and Eco, like they applied design by subtraction very differently, right? It feels like in Eco they subtracted in such a way that they were constricting the state space, right? Like constricting the complexity to the extent that like even though it is like a 3D action game and you have this like variability of movement and such, like the actual options you can undertake are very limited, and there isn't a lot of space to like I mean, I think like from watching speedruns of this game, thinking about going for the platinum, which I did not do, there's certainly a lot of quote unquote tech you can do if you're like, oh, I'm plugging a second controller, play as Ueda directly. I'm doing like 1 player 2 controllers. You can do a lot of like interesting skips and like avoid some shadows, etc. But like overall, the actual mechanics don't beget that actual like that much complexity. It's interesting comparing this to Shadow of the Colossus, where yeah, it's like you're saying, like if you look at if you were to look at how like small adjustments to like the amount of stamina used for a jump, or like positioning on the monster, or like your what way up a given colossi like you are looking for a particular weak point, right? And there's not to say that like I don't think the colossi are like particularly complex, or like the solutions for them are particularly complex. But that actually does feel like a game where you could try something subtly different and it yields somewhat different results. I don't think Eco ever approaches that. And to see that Shadow of the Colossus feels like it's the same sort of like very truncated core set of mechanics.
Yeah.
And to have Eco where it doesn't really have that, I think it is a little bit damning for Eco. And that's outside of the experiential realm for sure. But I think also like if you were to compare these two games that are relatively similar in terms of like options and what you can do, I think Eco does not hold up very favorably.
Yeah, this is sort of off topic. But whenever I was in combat in Eco this playthrough, I just couldn't help but play the DMC3 battle theme in my head.
I
think
actually,
which one?
I wanted to
like-
say actually this
Yeah.
is something I've been thinking about, but I think the combat is a real failure of design by subtraction, right? If you think about like, and I don't know their process for going through this. I have a feeling it was very like ad hoc and wrapped up into it himself, right? But if I think about like what could I take out of this game that would actually increase its depth, right? That increase it like the interesting things you can do with it. It is like 100% combat. Like it's just this totally useless vestigial element to the game that the points of the game, like say the graveyard, where you can actually you have to do some setups for it. It's not very elegant for like a casual player, and I certainly didn't achieve it very well when I tried it, but you can get through that without like engaging with the combat at all, and just like do these particular setups where you're avoiding the shadows and placing Yord on this one switch so you can get inside this little room, climb up, push another block from outside to replace Yorda, and then run with her inside. Like that's something interesting where you're like having to like account for all these shadows moving around and like the randomness of that. And so often the game is just like, why don't you just fucking fight them? Like, because they disappear, right? And it's like just fucking mash square, and you can jump slash at them. You can run slash if you just press it once versus 3 times. It's like, man, this is so much more boring than like if they had cut the amount of shadows in half and then took away your sword or your torch or whatever. Like, I think that's just a real like failure to apply the technique on their part, from my perspective.
Yeah, I've had like this thought replaying it again. I was like, this is so close to being like a perfectly length game, but just, I mean, one is like the fact that all the combat sequences have like the mandatory like little cutscenes, like oh no, they're appearing, and just there are so many of them, especially it's like the one room where you bring Yorda like across this like wooden it's like a lift, like you move it from one side of the space to another, and in that one room there's like 3 different fights, which is just so excessive. And it's funny because we're like the idea of like the combat being a process of design by subtraction. I remember Ueda saying like and this, I guess this is also part of like the idea of the game still having broad appeal, even though we kind of think of it as niche. But the combat was like sort of meant to be a very basic, like anyone can do this kind of thing. You know,
it's funny because like the tendency I see, I looked up some negative opinions on this game just because I'd not seen a lot, and it's funny. Almost all of them immediately knee jerk the other way. And say like, "Oh, design by subtraction failed. Combat should have been more involved." When
Dude, that's
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's insane to me.
I think might be a certified gamer moment, but yeah, it is interesting. The amount of I did come away from this playthrough noticing a lot more excess in a game that's famous for like design by subtraction and being pretty minimalist. So. I definitely don't think as highly of it as I used to because of that, but
Yeah.
I was definitely.
I
was just gonna say. No, I was just gonna say I was kind of wondering like if they should have added like an extra system or something, because I saw some people that talked about it like kind of in the context of like a survival horror game, and I was sort of wondering if this game should have had like. This just sounds really dumb, but like an amulet or something you could pick up and you kind of use it to stagger enemies, and then you have just like an ounce of like, okay, maybe I can run past this room if I time this well. And you know, it's a game with like I was thinking even about like the minimalist UI as well, like how much how many systems did that kind of prohibit as well. But I was wondering like could they have done something where, maybe it might seem like too artificial or too constructed. But it might have given the game like more life when you like return to it. Like, okay, I can run past this area if I time this stun really well. I can,
There is like one thing that like vaguely points to this. It's the last, say, mandatory fight before like the end game segment. It's in the second of the 2 towers, and you have to light the stick or light the flames with the stick on fire. But by this point, you have a sword, and there are like sticks in the room, but they're at the other ends of like where the fireplaces are. So when you light them and you open like the sundial thing, all the enemies spawn in, and at that point, it's kind of like taking advantage of the fact that the sword and the stick like still exist at all times, like even for puzzles. And it's like this one interesting time, like they use like more of like encounter design and actual like combat mechanics, but it's kind of like, okay, do I just stay here and fight, or do I go back and climb the ladder to get the sword? But Yorda might be captured. It's not like the most amazing thing ever, but I'm glad that this is like the one thing I remembered like when I played the game the first time, just like this one cool time it kind of plays with the setup of the area, which is probably like where most of the cool stuff in combat could happen, just like the scenarios, but most of the time they're not very interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I played this game called Another World that I'm pretty sure Ueda said he was like explicitly inspired by it. That game has a lot of problems, but one thing that game does actually quite well is it does have like a very sort of elegant combat system where you basically just have this gun and you can either tap the button to shoot a shot, hold the button to put up like a temporary shield, or like hold the button a bit longer to put like a shield breaking shot. And so it's like it's simple enough that it's just okay, it's very intuitive, but then there's like some stuff going on, and it's very fast too. Like if you shoot something, they just instantly vaporize, and if you get shot, you just instantly vaporize. So it does have a lot of that, like it sort of does feel, realistic or naturalistic in that way too, which I think is sort of,
The goal, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really, like people were saying, you don't really want like some crazy deep, mechanically driven thing here. You want
Eco-style
enough. I mean, ideally, yeah, you want the mechanical depth to be enough to convey some sort of feeling or experience. Yeah, I had a lot of problems with Eco too.
I think and that's a really interesting point to like seize upon, because I think in some ways the tedium and sort of like brainlessness of combat is really a detriment to the thematic like
I agree.
like the
That was a
exper-
huge problem I had with the game.
Exactly. Like, it's interesting. One of the I just dug through like Google Scholar, like looking for some like academic articles like Digra, that kind of thing, about this game. And one of them was it was funny. It was actually like they were talking about like ways, like psychological ways in which like Eco and Shadow of the Colossus like provoke emotion. And in their related works, they're sort of shading this other article that's talking about basically interpreting Eco the character as like a symbol of aggression. One of which being he has horns, which is just very funny to see. The quality of the academic writing is like, well, he has horns, so I'm just thinking of, like the Animal Crossing protag from like the GameCube one. Just he's a symbol of aggression because he has horns. Like that kind of very silly symbolism. But one of the things they did seize upon, which is like sort of an indicator of where it fails here, is like one of the ways you can tell that Eco's an aggressive character is because he instantly lashes out at these shadows. He instantly tries to fight them and wields a weapon against them. And it's like I think it would be presumptuous to go like, well, they intended these characters to be like fragile or like vulnerable or whatever. I think Yorda is definitely portrayed that way. And I think that's hard to argue against. It's more ambiguous with Eco himself, but it's like without trying to get into like, well, what were they trying to convey? Because it's sort of a fruitless argument unless we went and asked, right? And maybe even they don't know. But it's like, does what they convey with the combat feel congruent with what else we know about Eco as a character? And more importantly, does it lend depth to his character? Does it make us like, when we like look at him holistically, like what do we understand about him? And from the combat, it very much feels like it removes some of like the fear and the tension from having these like unearthly beings chasing you and having to like. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that Eco is sort of portrayed as like he is supposed to be like the protector of Yorda, right? And it's sort of it's the tables are turned in the end to sort of like the juxtaposition there. But I think also, is that really an interesting thing to pull? Like, oh, he's the protector and he's just like, it's like this kid running around with a stick, just mindlessly batting away shadows, or like purposely leaving Yorda to get captured so he can go finish something else and then run back to her. Like, it's not necessarily, I think, one that reflects well on or lends substance to his character in such a way that it like actually enhances the experiential aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I think even more than that, it's just not conducive to like the feeling the game is trying to instill in the player, right? I mean, broadly speaking, I'd characterize it as, it's sort of Eco's an experiential thing where you're going around and exploring this castle and sort of trying to generally be immersed in you traversing this physical space and appreciating the beauty of it. And it's like, okay, how does me sitting here mashing square on these shadows fit into that? This feels goofy. This is stupid.
Yeah. One thought of that. Oh, sorry, Alan. Yeah, you can go.
Well, I was gonna say, with the perspective of Ueda as an animator, first, something the rare thing I think the combat does do right is like it feels very frenetic and childish. Like, I mean, you are a kid smacking a thing with a stick, and it does very much carry that. And I noticed in like a couple other like this game is kind of slow, and so some players will be inclined to walk through it slowly and look at everything. But a lot of people will just be like grabbing Yorda by the hand and booking it to the next spot. And I think that kind of lines up well with this like childish interpretation of Eco, is like he's just going. He's not really putting a lot of thought into it. He's not like aggressive. He's proactive, I guess is the way I would interpret it.
I guess sort of
I
on
like
that
the
note.
interpretation on that for sure.
Yeah, I think on that note, one of the final sequences in the game, just before the final boss, where you fight this horde of shadows that, you like the way the game reveals it is really interesting. Where you're back in the actually I don't know if I think it's the same room, right, where you start in.
It is the same room.
Yeah.
It is,
And-
yes.
And all the they set up at the opening of the game where there's all these other sacrificial coffins you would assume that other boys with horns were put in, and then you fight those shadows and they sort of resemble ICO, and then you also see when you look around you see the corresponding coffins also start to glow. I think they glow as you take them down, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's not like the super deep reveal or anything, but like, I guess like Alan, what you were saying about sort of the childlike nature of the movements, just the fact that those shadows, the way they fly is by flapping their arms around really strangely. I don't want to like oversell the moment, but there was something kind of genuinely unnerving about that. I thought there was one moment where I think the combat was pretty well executed. I do think I would agree with y'all that like then actually mechanically executing it and fighting it for an extended period does kind of soften the blow as it goes. But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was like that their design and animation. Like I did really like that aspect of that fight, but it is one of those things where like you were saying, it's like it goes on for so long. You start to wonder, like, okay, am I doing something wrong? Like, is there some other way I'm supposed to go about doing this? Or like just the way they behave, like they don't attack you, they just jump away from you, and like personally, I was so fucking frustrated by just how difficult it was to hit them. But there's no stakes, so it's just tedious without any risk involved. So it was just like, why do I have to do this? But generally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the combat, because I do agree that the combat is quite poor, and especially at the beginning. Like I just fucking hated it. Once you get the sword, it gets a little bit better because it does more damage. But at that point, it's like, if they're gonna die in 2 hits, why even have combat?
Yeah, funnily enough, that's like also just where combat either they're just less encounters or there's something else that I'll let you go first, and then it's something else.
Right. It does sort of the encounters do become a little bit more sparse later on. But the one area that I think is like potentially cool, and there are redeeming aspects to it, and it could have maybe been expanded on in some way, is like just the aspect of like protecting Ueda during those things, because the actual interactions between you and the enemies are terrible. But like keeping track of Ueda, and like when she gets grabbed, the enemies will like fly her off, and a lot of the open areas, like it's very easy to lose track of her, and you have to like spin the camera around in all these different directions. And just the fact that like if she gets stuck in a hole, it's not enough to just kill the shadow anymore. You actually have to press the handhold button and pull her out. Like that to me was enough to like tie the combat in with the puzzle solving. And like I do think it had some thematic cohesion, which with the rest of the game, and that hand-holding aspect, for me at least, did end up tying the combat and the puzzle solving together a bit. But I also wanted to touch on for a little bit just the way this game handles design by subtraction. And minimalism is something that I really value in games. And like Pang was saying about how the way this game approaches minimalism, it really is harmful for like the state space and like just creating interesting decision making and all that. But it was really interesting to go back to Ueda's games, after all these years, because the way he does minimalism is of course, primarily for like tone purposes and atmosphere purposes. And I think, and there are some like design benefits from the minimalism. Like I think having so few aspects does make puzzle solving a lot easier, because there's just fewer aspects, fewer game objects on screen. It's much easier to discern like what your goal is and what you have to do. So there is like, the minimalism does have some gameplay elements, but it's primarily in service of the story. And I think there are like with the story being as sparse as it is, with when there's so few details to sort of latch onto, just you focus in on the little minute things. Like for me, one of the nice things I realized very early on was, like Ueda is clearly a lot older than ICO, and like ICO is like this sort of fish out of water, and Ueda is like the princess of this castle. And it's I think it does make ICO a little bit better as like a sort of stand-in for the player, as you're both in sort of the same situation where you want to adopt this sort of protector role, but you want to be like the hero of this game, but you don't really know what the fuck you're doing. You don't know anything that's going on, and like all the swords you pick up are like way too big for you. And it did make the relationship for me, I think, hit a little bit harder, because he's like, ICO is so like in over his head.
Yeah.
I think that's all I had to say.
Like related to that, I did immediately take notice that Iko's initial impulse to save Ueda, or to let her out of the cage when he finds her, he explicitly says, "Hey, I'm gonna help you." It's purely altruistic, right? He doesn't realize at that point that he will need her to escape the castle, and I guess it's sort of, I think The Last Guardian, obviously, now that we have that game, it's sort of cast an interesting light on ICO. Like, it's really hard to analyze ICO and not think about The Last Guardian and how much more you feel, oh, it's like actually a genuine relationship between two characters in that game. Whereas ICO in that way is very flat. And I guess in this playthrough, I tried to sort of rewire my perspective a little bit. And yeah, I would agree with y'all that I don't think it's a game necessarily about a relationship. It's more a game about just kindness in general. And just again, ICO is in this terrible situation himself, but the game then asks you for your patience to help this other person that clearly needs it way more than you, right? Or even more than you. I guess it's just that, yeah. One thing that when we first attempted to record this, I drew some comparisons to other games with a similar setup, like Inside, for example, where it's very clear that every set piece, every puzzle, every gameplay thing also attempts to expand on the theme a little bit. And I think The Last Guardian also, falls into that pattern, right? Like every gameplay moment has some kind of overall emotional purpose, and in ICO that's just not the case at all, right? In ICO, the way I originally put it was, yeah, it feels like an excuse to kind of look at the pretty visuals.
Yeah, I guess it feels a lot more amateurish, which makes there's quite a bit of time between The Last Guardian and ICO.
I didn't even want to imply that it's like sort of like a failing on the game's part necessarily. It's just like something that's interesting about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like it's lauded as like the not gamey game. It does the minimalism, it subverts, but then like all of its a lot, or at least what I view as like a lot of its flaws are come from doing the gamey thing instead. Like you were talking about the situation design, how The Last Guardian, everything is like developing on its theme, whereas it feels like ICO's level design is there to develop on its mechanics and look pretty, and it doesn't really have the mechanics to develop.
Yeah.
It's an interesting comparison, I thought. And this is like one of my big takeaways from playing this time. And I just for context, I've never played Shadow Colossus before this, but I played through like the first 10, so like a little over half the game. When you're like Eco definitely feels like there weren't a lot of games around this point that had this kind of like environmental persistence, right? Where you're exploring this one big castle, and every single like aspect of maneuvering around the castle, and a lot of the puzzles are around sort of exhibiting like look where you are in locality to everything else you've come through, right? And you're sort of I think the game is just in for context, I'm sure most people listening by this point have played the game, or else you're getting super fucking spoiled. But the game is, you have this like intro sequence, and then you go to like the exit to the castle, and then you can't get out. You have to activate these two pillars, and so you basically explore like the east, the east half and then the west half, sort of like spiraling through the whole area, and you get to sort of see like come back to the middle each time, and then explore this this big structure that eventually turns on this tower, and then you come back to the middle and then try the other side, right? And in that way, I think that is like the game's strongest suit, is giving you this chance to explore this environment, and all the puzzles are in service of this, like showing you some new aspect of the environment, and then tying it into what you've seen before. There's a part, it's this little like the little reservoir area where I think it's like right after you exit the gate, like you go to the ending gate and then you go back the first time. And it's basically like you go up this lift, and then there's this sort of grassy area that's on top of this this reservoir area that you eventually have to bring Yorda inside. There's a little like switch puzzle there, and there's like these there's these windows you can climb into on the like the west area of that section, relative to the camera, where you can look out over the middle area. Like it only exists just for you to go and see. Oh, okay, like here's where I am relative to the previous areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, it's like it's trying to make an area that should like this very claustrophobic castle that you're like very literally trapped inside. And at one point, we're extremely trapped inside, right? Like within this vessel, and Yorda within a cage, and create like a larger than life space, right? But and this might seem like a little bit of a comparison. There were games that did this prior, and like Ocarina of Time is like the one that always pops into my mind as like something that really revolutionized the idea of like persistence in a space, but environmental puzzles that like directly tie into the space and manipulate the space, right? And change your perception of the space. And in that way, I mean, I know this is not necessarily like a group of Ocarina lovers. I know I played it like very late in life, and I really enjoyed it. And a lot of it was based around like that same experience. Like you explore a giant dungeon, and you're like seeing different parts of it from different angles, and like doing parts like things in one part that extend to another, etc. I think that Shadow of the Colossus is a lot more innovative in that regard, because it does the complete opposite. You're taking this gigantic sprawling space and shrinking it down and making it feel suffocating and dead and lifeless. And I can't think of any other games that capture that particular feeling, right? And I think that's for me another strike against Eco, comparing it to what came after, is like what Eco does is good in that sense, and interesting and very and relatively well considered. I mean, on a replay, the castle does not seem as big as it did the first time, but there were already games that had achieved that model, right? And I think what Shadow does in comparison, creating this just vast space that feels like perfunctory and like purely like a substrate for you to pass through as to reach a boss. Like I think that was a much more interesting idea in comparison to Eco, for sure.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think that I think one of the biggest problems with Eco is just how clearly it's taking inspiration from like earlier cinematic platformers, and just the entire structure of the narrative is just like it's basically like Mario Brothers. It's just about rescuing a princess from a castle. Like it's very video gamey 101 stuff, right? But it doesn't have that kind of unique structure and pacing that Shadow of the Colossus does. But I do think, like, on the subject of like the castle as a big space, um, and that you're sort of slowly unraveling. I wanted to say one of my favorite things about this game was the camera system, and
Yeah.
because I think one of the like the hallmarks of Ueda's work to me is just how they're very sort of traditional like adventure game narratives, but ultimately sort of uh, uh, that don't revolve around the player. Like, you are not the center of the universe in Shadow of the Colossus. Like, these are giant creatures that don't really care about you, right? And Trico in Last Guardian is like famously uncooperative, right? Like, these are not games that are built to serve you, the player, right? And I think just like Eco has it doesn't have like the complex AI companions of his later work, right? But I think just the fact that the camera, like, you just nudge it and like Eco just immediately flies off screen. Like, the camera, it doesn't revolve around you like it does in like Shadow of the Colossus or whatever. Like, uh it's mostly about just looking around all these different castle environments and trying to piece together how the space works. And like the most striking moment to me in the game was right at the very start. You get to the area where Yorda is in the cage, and you tilt the camera up, and it goes all the way up, and Yorda's cage above you, it feels like it's like 500 feet in the air. Like, the sense of scale is enormous. But it's actually, a very small environment. It only takes like, 20 seconds to reach her. And I think just the camera does such a good job of, enforcing that sense of scale, and that, like, like, that you are just a small part of this world. This is not, about you. It's about this world and all that. And honestly, I think the camera was my favorite part of the game, to be honest.
Yeah, I had a thought about that as well, where I think a lot of us, maybe, a lot of us gamers, right? We kind of get frustrated with babysitting cameras in games where that feels kind of incongruous to the appeal, right? Like in action games, for example. Meanwhile, I feel like a lot of more average players, they get frustrated when they, in a more fixed camera setup, they get frustrated when they can see stuff that's outside of the camera boundaries. And it just made me think, damn, why didn't more games copy Eco's camera? Because it feels like the perfect middle ground, where you get these really nice, curated cinematic angles, but then you can still spin the camera around as much as you fucking want, and then it just snaps back the moment you let go of the stick. That just seems like such a clever way to do it.
I will say the
yeah.
the camera did throw me a little bit on this last play. I I don't remember it being an issue on the first one, but some of the platforming in this game is like very like obviously scripted, right? Like, you sort of like jump at a certain point, and then he'll like leap a very particular distance. Like, it's not very organic in that sense. Not like some of his later stuff. And there are points. I remember the one. It's like one of the last puzzles you do before you get into the West Idol Tower. We have to like run across this crane to pull a switch and swing a block across your Yorda. I've pulled a switch. And I'm like running across, and it's like sort of at an angle, right? The camera's at an angle. I try going for the jump, and I'm like accounting for the angle, and then the camera like swivels behind me right as I get to the edge. So then I jump off at an angle, and I just fucking plummet.
And that's when you changed the backlot score to 2 out of 5.
Yeah, yeah. I just instantly just ran over to the site. It was like the lowest score possible. Fuck this shit. Bad game. I had a couple instances like that. It's a little bit. I mean, it's one of those issues where it gets back to the replayability thing. Like, once you sort of know what you're supposed to do, like, you try to be a little clever about it. And this is very much a game that it'll like slap you on the wrist, not on purpose, but just sort of in how it's built to be very to like highlight points of interest and like direct your gaze over to particular items. That when you try to like, it's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, and then you try to do something, and it's like, huh, we didn't account for that. It's a little that's a very minor grievance, but
Yeah.
I just want to throw it
I-
there.
I actually, because I was on this bit about this game being like very accessible, so I got a couple of friends who like don't play games to play just like the first little bit of eco, however far they wanted. And I got a couple people who like play games, but like not like a whole bunch. They're not like super deep into the medium or anything. And the combination of like eco's very ridiculous acceleration, like you like slightly tilt the stick left and hit jump, he's launching himself as far as he can, coupled with the camera. It wasn't really a bother for me because I've played this game before, and it might have been when I was younger, but I don't remember. It was absolutely a nightmare for some of them. I just
Yeah,
thought
that
it was
surprised me.
interesting.
Well, one thing I
no, go ahead.
one thing I thought was kind of interesting was the fact that this game does not have like a huge amount of magnetism when you're near a ledge. So they're like, I think this game has it's much more likely you'll go like careening off the side of some section when you're doing like platforming or something. And I think like to the game's credit, I think I had a much more like potent sense of vertigo during some of like the later platforming sections. I think there's one where you have to throw a bomb to like knock a piece of like a crane down. You have to walk across like a ledge, and that got me. And it's weird because it's like so many games since then, like your like Uncharted or Assassin's Creed or something. They have similar platforming, but they have more of like an invisible guardrail or something. I cannot remember unless you like explicitly tell your character to like jump off a ledge. They won't fall off, but I think it's like a much more simple interaction is made like more consistently nerve-wracking because of the fact that, like you can actually just fall off if you're if you tilt the stick too much.
Yeah, for me, it hit a good balance in a way where, yeah, like you said, I did feel the tension. I thought especially, do you guys maybe see this recent Leon Massey video where he talks about sort of the weirdness of translating like 3D coordinates and perspectives to what is ultimately like a 2D image, right? Like on a 2D,
Yes.
when the game is translated to pixels onto your screen, it suddenly becomes really weird to actually gauge the distances. And I had a very like the final section of the game when you fall down the bridge and you're separated from Ueda. I don't know if anybody else had this feeling, but like suddenly the distances between the platforms felt so much more I don't know, they looked impossibly far away from each other, but then it was still possible to make the jump. That was kind of the sense I had. Yeah. And again, for me, it was like I never got frustrated with it, but I still had that nice sense of tension. That kind of worked for me.
That part of the game, even when I first played it, was by far my least favorite part of the game. Like, because this game, I mean, they could have really gone without that section or like truncated it, because it feels like it almost feels like very traditional obstacle escalation, which is very bizarre in a game like this, where it's like, all right, here's the final challenge. We're gonna test everything you learned. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is like, I was like roaming the castle and protecting my poor Yorda. I didn't want a fucking platforming challenge.
Why is there a Mega Man level here?
Yeah, fucking yeah. It's like, okay, time for Wily's castle. It's like, excuse me, fucking what? And it's very yeah. Some of the camera angles in that section, like there's one where you're looking. It has like a pinhole effect. Like you go through a little corridor and it like centers in on the corridor, and there's like these it's like a water wheel or something, and you're supposed to grab onto one of these like spokes hanging out of it.
That one got me, dude.
Not really spokes. Yeah, and it's weird because like I remember the first time I played it, I was like, I can't fucking see it. The perspective's so weird. I didn't realize like the first time I played, like, oh, you have to run over to the edge of the ledge and then the camera recenters.
Oh my god.
It's so like and it's funny. The second time I got the whole thing first try, like without falling in the water at the bottom. I was ecstatic. It was like, I truly proved my worth as a expert eco gamer, doing this like oh, we have to fill out this random section. Also climbing down that tower at the end as well. Also very like there's parts in there where it looks like you should be able to swing over to the middle, They're just like
yeah.
ridges.
Yeah.
And they're just like, well, these aren't climbable ridges. What the fuck were you thinking? And it's very much like, especially playing this alongside Shadow, it's like, oh, that game actually is very much, if you see it and it has a ridge, you can probably climb it. Like, even if it's like not useful or unorthodox or whatever. You can tell this game is like a lot more scripted by comparison, which makes the. I mean, I get that they need to beef up the length, but they should have done something more fun by just adding more combat encounters to the end. Just like fight a giant room of the shadows. Like that would have been so much more fun than.
They do a Shenmue at the end.
Yeah, exactly. We should have had a Shenmue final sequence where you have to like bust back into the castle, just like fight a mini boss, all that shit.
I actually don't get that about it having to be too long. This game's already too long. This game, I mean, this is my opinion. This game's middle section majorly drags. A lot of the imagery to me is kind of the same, and there's like, it just, I don't know, it feels like any sort of like emotional like up and down sort of just stops.
I can see that.
Other than like, I guess you get the sword and something. Because the opening and ending actually have sort of good moments. I thought the opening was my favorite part of this game, which is I think not a good sign for the game. The ending was okay. The ending was cool though. But like, I don't know. Like, it really does feel like, man, I sure am in these environments. Like, I don't know. Also, like, I'd kind of be preferring to like just look at the concept art and then like hit the page when I'm ready, you know? Like,
I guess maybe that sort of ties into like maybe the final point that I want to make, and it's that we talked a lot about how this game obviously doesn't have like a huge state space that's very very meaningful, which is a weird thing to talk about with ICO, but like, you know, that's beach gen for you. But I overall, I would say, for me personally, this game does leverage the medium well. And I guess, yeah, like Hot Pocket, you were saying that you would prefer to just look at the concept art. I totally get that perspective.
I think that its choice of medium actively detriments it most of the time. I think the mechanics, I think more often than not, were basically preventing me from seeing it as like an experiential, exploratory experience, and more of like a mechanistic, like, oh, I have Yorda, who's this sort of, you know,
yeah, for sure,
object, and I have to do these fixed things with her, you know. And it's really, really striking compared to The Last Guardian, which I think is just a brilliant game and just better in every way. How much it, like, that game does the opposite, where the mechanics are actively encouraging you to sort of sit back and view the world as this sort of real place, and to like not be so rushed and like, oh, we gotta go, you know, and like having to, you know, it's that game. I mean, that someone said Ueda's games are about relinquishing control, and like, but like ICO really is, you are in full control almost the whole time. But like Last Guardian, you actually aren't, and it really shows in how you experience the games, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally understand the perspective. I guess the question that I'm asking myself sometimes is that maybe like, how different would my relationship to this game be if it wasn't so insanely beautiful? That was one of my main takeaways actually from the experience. I don't know if anybody else was like as staggered by the visuals this time around.
I was holding the walk button most of the time I playthrough.
Yeah, it's just like every time you like step out into the sun or like you see a patch of green, I would just like actually audibly gasp, you know, like and it made me think like, oh yeah, Alan, do you want to say that?
I would say that ICO is probably aesthetically Ueda's most pronounced game.
Yeah,
I would say with how the architecture and the grass itself is like combined together to like kind of like as well as the lighting, it all like combines together to like really pop, you know, and help improve the atmosphere a lot.
Yeah, there's something very sort of, it's like the palette is sort of homogenous in a good way, if I would put it, maybe.
Yeah, there's also like the long art history of like this aesthetic. That, and we talked about it before. The even the normies will pick up on and be like, Ghibli, because like blue and green and gray. I think like the kind of folk tale-y nature of this game, like I guess of Ueda's games, it feels the most folktale-y, and the visuals do the most for it in that sense.
Yeah, it even made me think about sort of the we discussed in our first session how originally Ueda wants to make this as a movie, and then Sony offered him, the chance to make it as a game set, right? And it made me actually very actively think. It made me very actively think about like, damn, it's like such an insane amount of extra effort to get this shit to render in real time, right? By a PlayStation 2, and when the experience is so visually driven, why would you go through that kind of torture as an artist, right? Like, why would you make that effort? And oh yeah, sorry. I guess I'm just gonna finish the point real quick. Yeah, it's like for me, the fact that I am inhabiting the space that did really make the difference. I totally see Hot Pocket's perspective on it, but even with like little interactions, that the save bench is like something where you walk into it and they sit down and you actually have to press the R1 button again to like call Ueda to sit down as well, and then that triggers the save prompt, right? And just the peaceful nature of that. Again, like how it ties this like really cute aesthetic moments into the larger nature of it being a video game. It's those kinds of things that really endear me to it.
I was thinking we were talking about like the medium either being like a detriment or a benefit to it here. And I definitely err more on the side of benefit. Even if this game had like no mechanics, like you literally did nothing but walk with the girl through the castle, I think I would prefer it aesthetically as a video game, because the experience of looking at a castle as it is shown to you on like a film screen or something, as opposed to just like being in the, and obviously that is not like a unique selling point for this game. Most video games have like some sort of physical space, but I think the craftsmanship here is really impeccable, and I'm glad I got to experience it this way, because there are other movies out there with similar enough aesthetics that it would have felt more redundant there.
I did want to say that I think something that's like there's a juxtaposition in my mind. It's like, yeah, if we're looking at this as a movie, like I'm like gonna shout out Fallen Grace from Backlog, and he brought up this like interaction that you're gonna have where she find like there's like a flock of birds on the ground, and she's like sees them for the first time, and she's curious, and she just sort of like runs to them, and they all like fly away, and she just sort of like wistfully like stares off at them, right? And there's something different about seeing that as like a scripted moment in a film, where it's like you never get a sense of spontaneity from it, or like it's not organic in the same sense, right? Like you sort of the framing via like the lens of the camera like prohibits it from being something that can like startle the player or startle like the watcher in the same way, right? Because it's like the director put it there on purpose, But at the same token, the reason I'm citing Fallen Grace on this is because it didn't fucking happen to me. I never got to see it, Like I'm saying it secondhand, and that is the big like sort of like while in video games you can have the spontaneity, you also if you don't get that same experience, then it's like, well, what are you missing? Now, the one good experience I did have is in very early on in the chandelier room where you like blow up the bridge. I kept trying to get her to go down the chain rope, not understanding that she like couldn't do that, right? Because she can go down ladders, so it's like, why can't you go down a rope? I was like, it's not that hard. And she kept like wandering over to the windows. I keep pulling her over, and finally like, oh my god, bitch, what is up over here? And I look up and I see the windows. It's like, oh, I can climb these. And to me, that was a very like, that was my organic like Yorda is a real person moment, right? But if you get one of those and then you get two or three, Yorda is climbing down the ladder, but you're like a centimeter too close to the bottom of the ladder, so she climbs back up, and you have to call her again, and she just like keeps going up and down again. Like, and that was the replay for me. It's like I just kept getting those moments. Yeah, it's and I get that it's like the fact that Yorda like her AI exists at all. And like, if you look in the credits, there's like a Yorda AI credit for like people who explicitly just worked on getting her to work. That is a technical achievement. I don't want to diminish the importance of that. But it is very much like a. It might have been a little like almost a little too early, right?
Mm.
Raph, you want to say that? You've been saying it, Chet. I think you're doing a bit by not talking. I'm gonna force you to talk. He unmuted and now he's still not talking. Oh no, he's just typing again.
I'll say this is why the Last Guardian was like in dev hell, because they wanted to nail it.
Yeah, exactly.
It was totally worth it. Yeah.
What Raph said is he's trying to say is that she's scripted to walk/point towards the solution after X amount of time, and it's like, yeah, that is like something that has to be in there, you know, like to make it operate in a smooth way. But it does because you're like in control of the interaction in some sense, like you're controlling the camera to whatever extent you can control it. It feels more organic, right? But then you go all these other situations, it's like every time she fucks up or does something that like I know you were locked in a cage, but there's no reason for you to like keep going up and down this ladder like this over and over again. Like, what is wrong? What is your damage? Like, it does sort of hurt the I don't know. It's that's the interplay between like cinema and games. It's like what you gain from switching the medium, you also sort of lose in a sense. It's one of those things. It's like, man, I wish I could experience again for the first time, so I could think it was a 7 and not a 6. You know, like.
Hot Pocket was hinting at this earlier, but like I just gotta say it now. One of the most unnecessarily complicated problems in game programming is just getting an object to move to a specific location and then having it stop, right? Because of how games often update, the object will often overshoot or undershoot the target and then just keep wiggling there when it's there. And I had that happen a bunch of times with Ueda, and it was just hilarious. I don't have a deeper point there, but like, damn.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this was yeah, see, when I said earlier, it makes me sound like I hate the game. I don't really hate the game. I'm just a little kind of, I think the praise is way too much. But it's like, to me, it's not like a game that I'm mad at, because it's just very clearly like a prototype game that's just for the vision he had. I feel like the technology and the budget just wasn't there. Like, and you can tell also. I think Raph's mic is busted, but he said earlier this was I think this was his first game. I could be wrong. Maybe it wasn't. But like you can really tell, in my opinion, that he was an illustrator and not a game developer yet, because I feel like the sense of using the interactivity, it's like he kind of has like a root, like that moment with Yordi you were talking about. There's like flashes of that there, but it's definitely not really fleshed out, and I'm not sure it really even would have been particularly feasible to, in terms of this specific idea of it that he has in this game.
I mean, I am kind of rolling in my head around the idea that maybe Ueda is a hack, because like because of the comment, I think we mentioned it last time, where he was surprised that people connected more with aggro and Shadow of the Colossus, the horse, than with the catatonic bitch that you don't know anything about. Yeah.
He's an eccentric guy for sure. I think that's one of the things. I think if someone was like self-consciously like, here's what I'm gonna do, here's these themes I want to instill, right? Then I don't think these games would have the same sort of like, because they really don't beat you over the head. I think a lot of that is because he didn't sit down and think, I want to convey, like friendship or codependency, or like meeting a stranger and leading them through this place or whatever. I think he just thought it was like what if there's a damn castle and there's a kid with horns? Like, because what was it? And maybe we said this last episode as well, but the whole Toyama, the Silent Hill guy, was talking to him, and it was like, I wanted to know where you got your what references you're using for your ruins. Like, they look so natural. And he's like, oh, it just came from my fucking head. I've never gone to see ruins. I think it is like bringing that up again. I think that really does give you a view into his mind is that he just is someone like Kenji Eno sort of highlighted about him, is like he just creates these really elaborate worlds in his mind, and they're sort of unique and profoundly his in such a way that people are able to ascribe deeper meaning to it. And I mean, it is sort of Kojima's like the opposite of this, because he's like this Wikipedia core, like solid minus is equals old, like just the stupidest fucking. But it's sort of the same way with the Metal Gear 2, where I think it was Tim Rogers was talking to him, is like how did you envision this like postmodern masterpiece? He's like, I mean, it's not that good. I literally just shoved a bunch of tropes together from action movies I liked and called it a day. You know, it's like I think the auteurness of this game, to make up a word there, is sort of wrapped up in just the way I think he and the people he gathered to design around him were able to envision something that feels steeped in a history and enraptured in like and meaning and personality with these two characters. But it also, by the same token, with Ueda specifically, I think it also takes a certain kind of mind to like fill in the blanks, right? And I know, I mean, I'm certainly capable of filling in the blanks, but for this one, I think there were too many. I don't know. There's
Too many blanks.
There's things.
No, that's
Yeah,
not
some
it.
of the blank. Yeah. Or it's like, there's so many blanks, and then it's like I could come up with something that I could do something like, oh well, he has horns, so he must be aggressive. Just like that sort of like almost. I could go Mad Libs on the blanks, you know, but I don't think that does it justice. And no matter what I fill it in with, it never feels non-contradictory and I don't know. I'll expound on this more because I haven't like developed this point. I guess this is like when I write my Shadow of the Colossus review. This is like a sneak teaser, but I think I've been trying to think of like critique dialectically, right? Like I did this I was talking about Devil May Cry 3. Like I wanted to highlight like there's a contradiction here, but the contradiction yields like a material benefit to the game that gives it a unique flavor, right? And I think if I had to sum up my issues with ICO in like one succinct point, I think that there's no contradiction in this game that doesn't bring it down. Like every contradiction you highlight in the game is something that is like to its detriment. Whereas, like, you know, it's something like Shadow, like I said it at the beginning, like you have this vast open world and it's dead and lifeless. That's like a lovely, delicious contradiction that you can feast upon, right? That yields interesting thoughts. Whereas with Eco, it's like, okay, I have, you know, should I perceive this character as vulnerable? But oh, he's just running around like killing shadows like it's nothing. Like, am I protecting Yorda? Am I like codependent with her? But I'm actually just like dragging her around and she's like not really I'm ignoring her most of the time and letting her get captured by the shadows so I can like run off and solve puzzles. And it never it doesn't feel like a game that's like able to withstand that kind of scrutiny in the same way. But for some people, they might, you know, there are contradictions they can probably highlight that made them pause and feel interest, right? I think, and there's some that you can, like, if I were to go deeper into like ideas and maybe like, oh, I think that the horned people in general are supposed to be some sort of like they're meant to entrap Yorda, like, you know, the horned shadows like surround her and turn her into stone, right? And they're spread all over the place, like they're the blocks that Yorda has to break. Like the statues of horned people on all of the gates that Yorda has to open, right? There are things I could seize upon there, but it's like there's too many blanks surrounding them, right? And it's like, well, where do I fill this into the point where I can actually like extract something meaningful out of it and explore, like, say, the contradiction in that what should be like a subjugator of Yorda is actually her protector, right? It's something I could seize upon, but it's like, how much of that is me just doing academic writing in my head, you know? So that's succinctly where I fall on this game.
So yeah, that is very thoughtfully put. I only have a really dumb response to it, and that is that for me it is a game where you either just vibe or you don't, kind of. Because like, yeah, I agree with you. Like a lot of the stuff isn't really worth worrying about, and to me the game's appeal sort of can extend beyond any concrete meaning of like of whatever symbolism that it has. But I think, yeah, I mean, Hot Pocket, for example, put in chat like that The Last Guardian again highlights just the way that game is fleshed out allows you to extrapolate so much more from it. Like so much more concrete stuff.
I think there's something that we seized upon in chat as well. I think Raf posited this earlier. Like, to what extent do we spend too much time trying to look for themes, right? It can't just experience it, right? Like experience the aesthetics. And I think y'all got at this point earlier with like discussing how beautiful the castle is and how much of it this game is like built around like viewing the castle, right, and just like taking it in, breathing it in. It is sort of hard. It's like how much do I want to appreciate this as like a literal visual work of art. But on the other hand, I had a like big ass TV next to my bed. I'm playing this on, and I'm seeing like looking at the trees in the background and like little 2D 2D images like pasted together look like trees. And it's like, you know, it's the older I get, it's harder for me to get impressed by I know too much about how they work, you know, like it's hard for me to get that Wizard of Oz, like seeing the big head. I accidentally just pull behind the curtain, you know, which is why Shadow of the Colossus is on PS2 is better, because with fewer frames you get fewer chances to see the internal you know, see the internals and how they work. You're put in this dreamlike state. It's really trance-like. I think if I had played Eco at a lower frame rate,
the double buffered 15 FPS puts you in a dreamlike state. I think that's our thesis statement. I guess yeah, we didn't get too many takes from Raf or Simon. Do you guys have maybe anything you want to get off your chest before we close off?
No.
Thank you.
I guess Simon, I'm really curious because I know you're a big fan of Ueda's games generally.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I should say that I do generally agree that the combat in Eco is like, when I see people like defend it, it's often reactionary. I do think it does kind of like bogs the pace, especially in the US version of the game, where enemy health is doubled. But I do think that when people do defend the combat, it's ultimately like in service of that second to last moment, which is genuinely like was really impactful to me. Like kind of like recognizing that like, oh, this is what would have happened to Eco, you know? And now here I am in this situation.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I was on the note of like contradictions and stuff. It's like the most meaningless combat. And I guess any split in opinion in this game is probably going to come down to how much of not a lot can you tolerate for what the game does have a lot of, you know.
Yeah, sure.
It's a game that doesn't make trade-offs a lot, instead of just like often just taking an L on something, which is unfortunate. But like it does really exist in those like two halves, I guess.
Yeah, I think that is a really good way to put it, because for me, the combat was not this active detriment, right? I noticed that it wasn't adding anything. I noticed it was shallow and like kind of stupid in the way it was presented, and how it's maybe affected the game's tone. But overall, it wasn't something I thought about too deeply. Yeah, again, I guess like it really just depends on like maybe the general relationship you have with video games, like just how much tolerance you have for some things. Yeah.
Well, I know Alan mentioned it with Shadow of the Colossus, but I was thinking a lot about the performative quality of these games. I think Alan, did you mention that?
Yeah.
Because I Because I was thinking this is the most I felt like going through like a dress rehearsal for what the experience could be. Like this is not the actual production. This is like the stage lights are up, everyone's walking around in their sweats, and I'm like kind of okay. Yeah, in 10 years when I've forgotten how this game actually plays, or when I've forgotten like the details of this game, I can go in, hit my marks, and go like as a different person, probably enjoy this a lot more. I think it's also a game that like maybe someone said this. It is like it is so minimalist that when you look at it with any kind of scrutiny, you're like, there's not much here. There's not much like stuff to uncover. I was thinking even some of like the like successors. I was thinking about like The Last of Us or something, where it's like even if you did not really care for the relationship between those two characters, there would probably be more stuff. There'd be more like scavenging or more to the combat that might like pull you along. But I think that comes back around to like, do you vibe with it or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I think The Last of Us is actually a good comparison because, like, I think from the discourse, that's like from how The Last of Us is like this 10-year-old game, and yet there's still fucking discourse about the ending and all that. Like, I'm not saying that necessarily speaks to its quality or whatever. I would say it speaks to the fact that there's some kind of substance there. It touches on something that really that the average human like deeply cares about and like has some kind of strong opinion on, right? And even then it's still possible for you to just like completely not vibe with it, right? And then not care about like whatever the game's presenting, right? Like I feel like I've seen a lot of The Last of Us takes where it's like, yeah, it's just a generic zombie game, I don't care even to like analyze or talk about it, you know?
It's funny that you bring up like Del bringing up Last of Us, because like thinking like the Naughty Dog, like how they drew from this game, right? And especially I think we mentioned earlier Uncharted, right? Like all these Western devs like sat down with ICO. It's like, oh, I can make my game interesting if I just tack on like a climbing sequence. Like, what if I just put a climbing sequence like in between me just slaughtering bad guys? I think and Eco probably has like a little bit on Uncharted in terms of like combat depth and like. Sorry. No, Uncharted's okay. Sort of okay, but it's definitely it's funny to see like all these people. Or I think I mentioned Sands of Time on the first recording we did.
God.
Like and I think Sands of Time is interesting because
supposed to consider there was technical difficulties.
Yeah, having Sands of Time is like. I
was told explicitly to write this down. So, and I think this may be like encapsulated like my problems with the game, but in that sequence where you get separated from Ueda, there's a part where you're dragging around a box, and I was like, "Wow, I've been separated from her, but it's almost like she's here." And I think that was. I think that was my like biggest issue with the game. It was like she feels like such a prop throughout it.
Yeah, that was like my when The Last Guardian came out. That was my immediate first response to it. Like, wow, this game makes Ueda feel so much more artificial, kind of.
I wonder how much of that, like, I mean, obviously, The Last Guardian has a lot more going for it design-wise, but I wonder how much of that comes down to like our communication with people normally being verbal and our communication with animals normally being more abstract.
I just think about
so
that,
like
yeah.
when Yorda doesn't talk to you for whatever reason, you're like, oh yeah, she's less animate because of it, because you expect more from a person, as opposed to Trico where you're like, yeah, he's doing like animal things, you know.
Yeah, there's more. I immediately thought, yeah, there's more allowances with Trico because he is an animal. You know, there's more you can sort of embellish in your mind. That's the thing. I feel like a game with two characters that don't talk to each other, human characters, like could be interesting. I mean, I'm not saying Eco is uninteresting, but that element of it could be more interesting, I feel like, than it is in Eco. I don't know how, but that's sort of the feeling I got.
This is why A Way Out is the true successor to the Eco. Well, see, I didn't say Brothers A Tale of Two Sons. the actual.
Yeah.
Which I did
Yeah.
play for this and came
yeah.
away with nothing interesting to say. I was so bummed.
Oh no. Was it good overall? I never played it.
It's a game. Like I don't really have any problems with it, but I didn't really like think much about it after I finished it.
It's just Joseph Fares. He's a Lebanese, and I'm Lebanese, so like, you know, I'm like,
You got to represent.
Yeah, I gotta support my bro. You know, like, I did like A Way Out as well. Yeah.
When is he gonna design like an actual game? Because I did like A Way Out, but I'm waiting on him to. I mean, I guess it Takes Two is sort of that.
It Takes Two has too much gameplay, actually. Like, it freaked Yulia.
It sort of does.
Yeah, like Yulia, my girlfriend, she like, sort of lacks the fundamental platforming skill. So she was like, she was having like an anxiety attack through It Takes Two. Like, it was just too intense. Whereas she could like very easily play A Way Out. Yeah, I was kind of bummed out that didn't work out.
Yeah,
I'm not.
Could she handle?
Heather's saying I'm
Could
putting
she handle
her.
playing as Yorda. Though?
Heather's saying in chat I'm putting Yulia on blast. No, I'm just describing the situation. Like,
You said she lacks fundamental platforming skill. That's
like, I mean,
so rude.
because she likes
Yeah, you
other
put that
types
on
of
your
games.
resume.
Because she likes other types of games, yo. Okay, like
I
I'll
mean-
just admit I'm a misogynist. Yeah, I'm just a misogynist. Like yeah, that's it.
Well, I mean, we've already called women cardboard boxes in this
So
episode,
fucking
so, you know,
true.
we're-
Yeah.
There's
I
this
hope
guy
y'all
he's
never
called
try to do-
Shozo Kaga.
I hope y'all never try to do Overcooked together. But, actually, maybe have y'all done Overcooked? You might actually like that one.
I think we played like a couple times in like larger groups, and I think I would always get kind of bored by it, and then just force the group to like stop. I'd be like, oh, let's play Smash. Like, yeah, I'm that
never
kind of
mind.
asshole.
You're the guy.
let's play
never
Smash
mind.
guy. Ooh.
Overcooked is so good, dude. That game is that. It's funny because it's like
It's
hard
like-
as tits, like compared to It Takes
Yeah.
Two, but then it's also like way easier. But maybe I'll just play ICO in the 2-player mode.
Yulia thought it was so
Ever
boring.
played Zorda?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, y'all
I tried
did
that
it?
for a bit.
Yeah, we that was like I think it was
It's great.
before we started dating. I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring over Eco and Klonoa too, and it's gonna be sick. And then she was like, this isn't it. This is not it.
Well, Eco 2-player is great because if Eco is holding her hand, the second player just can't do anything.
And can we script like a 4-hour comedy set and do it over a live playthrough of Eco 2-player?
It's like a sub goal on our Patreon. $5,000. Yeah, then we're gonna do that. Thank you.
You're just doing
For
Rodney
time.
Dangerfield. Like I can't get no respect. Like this damn bitch can't climb a ladder. This reminds me of my wife never makes me damn dinner. Can't get no respect.
Wait, who's the Yorda in our relationship?
It's a good question.
I think Rav, because he doesn't fucking talk.
Damn.
The world is
Me
missing out.
too.
I think he has the most thoughts out of any of us. It's just
He's gonna live.
But
He's gonna live at one of those. What's what?
We need
How
the
pale
Raph
is Raph, though?
soundboard. We'll just replace Raph with the soundboard for an episode. And,
They're just all like contradictory video game takes.
he did say Army of Two was the real Eco successor, and I do agree with that.
We were
Eco
talking
does have
about
more
Mad Libs
gameplay,
earlier.
and,
That felt applicable.
Yeah, I
Army
feel
of
like
Two's so bad.
I feel like we
So
could fill an entire episode dissecting Raph's true self. Like if he even has real opinions on anything. If anything, if like everything is maybe like a elaborate FBI scheme.
The autopsy of Raph.
Yeah. So I guess maybe this is a good point to call it.
There is like one more thing I kind of want.
Oh yeah, do you want to talk about the novel or?
Well, no, hell no. But,
Let's go.
it's some sort of like a combat and encounter design in service of the experience. One thing that I don't remember if I ever did this on my first playthrough, but in rooms where you're in combat but you can make it to like the pillars, if you bring Yorda there, it will kill every enemy on screen. And just as like a sort of personal experience, there was this one time where I was going for that, and I also needed Yorda to like make a jump as a shadow was about to grab her, and that was like pretty fucking cool. and it's cool that you can do that.
I guess that ropes into what Pang was talking about. Like, if you couldn't fight the enemies, the game would be better.
Yeah. Usually, like, most of the time, it's like a straight, like, run or just, like, a little climb. But it's like the one room with the water tower. That's, like, the one time where it's, like, super cool. And then right after that is the other combat part I talked about earlier. So it's, like, the two back-to-back. The two best parts.
Can I give my my recommendations if you like ICO that I blatantly stole from Raph?
Oh yeah.
Well,
I already saw Angel's Egg. It's too late.
Yeah. Watch Angel's Egg. It's 75 minutes, which is about as long as ICO should have been. That's a great movie. I think okay. Let me stop the hate for a second. If you actually liked like ICO's, very non-verbal and just highly visual like imagery style of storytelling, I think Angel's Egg is basically what you want.
Yeah.
See, I have the weirdest take on Mamoru Oshii movies, which is like they make me sleepy in like a good way. They put me like in a like dream.
The
state
horrible
somehow.
noise at the start of Angel's Egg is really hypnotizing.
Yeah.
Actually, if you want a better understanding of the relationship between people, you should check out the Motion Gravure series on PS2.
Oh yeah, that's the one.
That's my bit. Damn it.
Maybe
Now he fucking talks.
I bought one of them, Raph. It's my bit now.
Also, if you, I mean, the other two Ueda games are better, so play those. Another World has a lot of problems, but that's sort of an interesting game. And I think Ueda directly said like, "Yeah, I played this and it was fine." That was actually a pretty influential game. Yeah, and that game does have a lot of the same, or you can directly see sort of the through line there. And it's very short. That's a great quality about it.
I do think Another World does a better job, like having sort of scenarios that feel like they mean something, kind of. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, which is the
it's
thing that you
more annoying to play.
Yeah. I definitely prefer ICO overall, but it has that over it for sure.
Yeah. And then Edith Finch, What Remains of Edith Finch. That's sort of an interesting game in the sense of like it is basically like a walking sim, but it's sort of attempting to integrate the mechanics in a storytelling way that you sort of might have gotten from like Yorda walking around and doing things you don't necessarily expect. Definitely not as systemic, but like it's sort of in the same vein. And it's another short game. And then just play Rain World because
Hell yeah. Edith Finch is on PlayStation Plus Extra right now. I know some of y'all also use that service. It's pretty good. So that's how I want to play it right now. Yeah. So I just want to shout that out. Yeah. If nobody has anything else they want to say, I guess I would call it here. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Beach Gen Game Club. I'm glad I got to play this game with y'all, even though it was like kind of a weirdly like protracted process. Like it was so short, and then we kind of rushed it at the end. And I think the discussion we had was really interesting. Like even if there was a lot of disappointment with the game itself, from most of us here. Yeah, I think the whole yeah. Oh, sorry, Alan, go.
I was just gonna say this has convinced me that we could talk any game to death, though.
Yeah,
because we had so much to say about ICO in current year. So like,
yeah.
Basically, what I'm saying is we're getting to Mario Sunshine eventually.
Hell yeah!
No, fuck you. No, I'm not fucking doing it. Read my goddamn review.
Play Mario Sunshine again.
I'm never talking about that game again. I don't want to replay it.
There's exactly one game we were playing next.
No.
Mario Sunshine was never going to be next. I got to
make my one
y'all up a little bit first.
Let's just play that.
Yeah, the game we're considering for next month or whenever the next episode is Phantom Dust. For those listening, if you want to catch up now, that may change. I'm gonna say it on screen if that changes. Yeah, and with that, I'll wish you all a good whatever time it is where you live.
Woo.